Introduction. The Zenturian Revelation kicks off by reviewing historical events that transpired prior to humanity's departure from Earth. The first few chapters cover the span of 180 years. The activities and decisions made in this era solidify what is to come. Throughout the timeline of the Galactic Warfare series, events can trace back to what transpires in the following chapters of Earth's Requiem, the European Civil War, and the New Frontier. This glance at humanity's history is essential for understanding the grudges, hostilities, and relationships through the Galactic Warfare series. At the start of the book, humanity's destiny appeared to be forever intertwined with Earth. This would be the case until a major development arose in the chapter Breakthrough, altering the course of history. In this chapter, the first important characters are introduced. Following the significant events that occur in Breakthrough, the Milky Way erupts into strife, anger, hatred, xenophobia, division, war, and destruction. This eruption begins on Earth, seeping into the far reaches of the galaxy. Humankind finds itself trapped in a cycle of peace and war, and it does not take long for this phenomenon to spread to others. Galactic Warfare is not just a book of science fiction telling a simple story, but rather a complex view of human behavior among the heavens. A story narrated from the perspective of a documentarian, accompanied with dialogue between characters and their perspectives. Chapter 1 Visions. In a galaxy vast and Milky Way's expanse, lies a tale of foresight in a cosmic dance. A space opera woven with threads of fate, of destruction, corruption, power, and hate. Amidst the stars, an ancient prophecy foretold, a future where darkness would take its stronghold. A time of reckoning where worlds would collide, and heroes would rise, with destiny as their guide. From celestial courts to distant realms afar, the echoes of power stirred, like a fallen star. In a corrupted empire, ambition took hold, as tyrants craved conquest, their hearts turning cold. A once great republic, now a crumbling throne, where greed and deceit seep through every stone. A web of intrigue spun, a tapestry of lies, and shadows grew deeper beneath the starlit skies. Yet amidst this chaos, a glimmer of light, a beacon of hope, in the darkest of night. A young star admiral, with courage untold, chosen by fate, to shape the stories yet unfold. With a starship forged from dreams and steel, he ventured forth, his destiny to reveal. Across star systems and nebulous glow, he sought allies to face the impending blow. A surrogate, his vessel fair, sailed through stardust, a cosmic affair. A crew diverse, united by a shared quest, to challenge the forces that menace the crest. The Oracle of Visions, with eyes that could see, the doom that awaited, the galaxy's plea. He whispered of a weapon, a power untamed, that could reshape the stars, with destruction untamed. As they journeyed onward, new allies they found, species united, their defiance profound. From celestial beings to warriors bold, they rallied together, their purpose untold. But power begets power, and darkness it feeds, as empires clashed, planting treacherous seeds. Wars waged across systems, with fury unleashed, worlds turned to ashes, their hope now deceased. The young star admiral, burdened by his sight, could he avert the prophecy's dreadful plight? In the heart of the storm, he confronted his fears, his ship trembling, as destiny drew near. In the climax of battle, midst flames and despair, he gazed into the void, with a solemn stare. A choice lay before him, the galaxy's fate, to succumb to destruction or alter his state. With a surge of courage, he cast off his doubt, he confronted the darkness, his voice ringing out. An alliance of races, their strength intertwined, they fought side by side, with their spirits aligned. In the end, the prophecy's grip was undone, as unity triumphed like the rise of a sun. The corrupt empire crumbled, its reign at an end, a new era emerged, with a message to send. Throughout the Milky Way, a symphony of hope echoed among the stars, a promise to cope. For though destruction loomed, and powers may strive, together they'd prevail, as long as they'd thrive. So ends this space opera, its tale of grandeur, foresight, destruction, and conquest's allure. May we learn from its lessons, hold them close and tight, and ensure our own galaxy's eternal light. In the depths of the galaxy, a tragic tale unfurls, of an anti-hero's rise, a villain whose ambition whirls. Bajirus, the emperor, his heart draped in gloom, a shattered soul consumed by darkness, destined for doom. Once a noble warrior, with dreams of glory and might, Bajirus wielded his power, a beacon in the night. But the shadows seduced him, their whispers dark and vile, tempting him with forbidden knowledge, an offer he couldn't defile. He yearned for domination, to command the cosmic stage, a thirst for control, driving him to the brink of rage. With cruelty as his weapon, he forged his empire's domain, enslaving worlds and species, each one bearing his disdain. His subjects quaked in fear, under his tyrannical reign, while Bajirus reveled in chaos, his dominance sustained. He believed that strength meant cruelty, that power bred might, blinded by his own ambition, losing touch with the light. But deep within his heart, a flicker of remorse, a fragment of his former self, battling its course. The tragic anti-hero, caught in a web of his own design, haunted by past glory, tangled in his own decline. His empire thrived on fear, corruption at its core, as Vigirus built a fortress, trapping his soul even more. He ruled with an iron fist, his wrath swift and stern, yet inside him yearning for redemption would burn. The galaxy wept under Vigirus' cruel command, as worlds were plundered, ravaged by his hand. The cries of the oppressed reached the starlit sky, their hope flickering faintly, refusing to die. But destiny had woven a tangled web, and a new force emerged, a threat they would dread. An alliance of rebels, with courage as their guide, united to challenge Vigirus, their worlds intertwined. As battles raged across the cosmic expanse, the anti-hero's empire faced its final chance. Vigirus, his heart heavy with regret and despair, stood before his own reflection, the truth too much to bear. With every battle, a part of him chipped away, his hubris shattered, his empire in disarray. Vigirus, the galactic emperor, stared into the abyss, seeing the monster he had become, a soul devoid of bliss. Vigirus, the anti-hero, his tale etched in cosmic lore, a warning of the depths one soul can explore. In his quest for power, he lost sight of what was true, a tragic figure whose choices left the galaxy askew. So remember his story, let it serve as a guide, to navigate the temptations of power, to see the other side. For within each soul, a battle may ensue, and the path we choose shapes the universe we view. A legacy stained with despair, Vigirus too emerged, his heart consumed by an unholy flare. A sinister heir, driven by the thirst for power's might, to claim the throne and continue the cycle, in eternal night. Born of bloodline tainted, shadows entwined his soul, he inherited his father's darkness, his ambition beyond control. The galaxy still scarred, remnants of Vigirus' reign, felt the tremor of Vigirus II's ascent, a cycle renewed, yet again. He gathered loyalists to his cause, a following shrouded in gloom, whispering promises of dominion, like a harbinger of doom. With charisma and deception, he wove his web of intrigue. A master manipulator, seeking power at the highest peak. The cycle was challenged, a fracture in its hold, but the echoes of darkness still whispered, their story yet untold. The galaxy stood vigilant, united in its plea, to break the chains of villainy, to set their spirits free. A man awakes opening his eyes. He thinks to himself what all that was for, a vision, a prophecy untold, future, or just an odd dream? Unsure of what any of this means, he hopped out of bed and stared at the night sky before heading to work. A sign read above his bed, "Long live the Socialist European Union." Chapter 2, Earth's Requiem. The year is 2300 CE. For thousands of years since the rise of humanity, Earth has been harvested for almost all it has to offer. The planet was becoming more and more crowded, reaching a population around 11 billion. Where there was great technological progress, there was great societal destabilization. Where there was once peaceful meadows, there are now horrific battlefields. The population capacity of the planet has peaked, and extreme measures have been taken by the three major nations on the planet to keep this threat under control. Seasonally planned mass conflicts and genocides for generations were orchestrated, with blame quickly being thrown between separate cultures, ethnicities, and religions. This eliminated much of the diversity on the planet, allowing the three nations to dominate the entirety of all land on the globe. But even with the great feat of world conquest, war and struggle between the nations persisted alongside slavery, famine, and the drying up of fresh water sources. Desperate for solutions and change, the nations looked to the stars as their ancestors had decades ago. Previous space exploration and colonization failed, with missions sent to Mars and the Moon in the 2100s. The final frontier was abandoned, and what ensued was a global conflict lasting decades, bringing devastation to the planet. Over 2 billion people perished in this war, and nuclear arms were unleashed in the conflict, leading to a thick cold smog hanging in the atmosphere. The three nations were the only ones to come out alive from the nuclear apocalypse and endless stream of conflicts. They had each other to rely on, as they were all allied together on a common consensus to survive and eliminate all other nations and groups of people. The weakest of the three, a communist state known as the Socialist European Union, controlled all of Europe, Middle East, and Northern Africa following the chaos. The Humanic Empire, formerly the United States of America, controlled all the Americas along with many Pacific islands and all Central and Southern Africa. The government reigned under a military dictatorship and abolished many of its ancestors' practices that once made up its nation, the United States. The most unhinged nation of the three was the Eastern Empire, led by an absolute monarch controlling the whole of Asia. Being the largest contributor to mass genocide and controlled famines, this nation planned mock conflicts with the other two nations in their African and Middle Eastern regions to keep their population from increasing to unsustainable levels. All three nations made an agreement to turn what was once Australia and New Zealand into untouchable stomping grounds. Here they shipped over their unwanted and excess population they labeled as undesirables to live on their own, just as the British Empire did with their prisoners in the past. With little to no food or supplies when they were dropped off, the undesirables quickly fell to cannibalism and disease. Whenever an organized revolt took place on these islands, the Eastern Empire quickly shut it down with nuclear firepower. To this day there have been 7 organized revolts, all of which were wiped off the map with nuclear weapons. This unrestricted usage of nuclear warheads turned Australia into a radioactive wasteland where mutations began to spread among the survivors. The untouchable territory was truly hell on earth, brought into existence through the destructive nature of man. Chapter 3: The European Civil War. In the years that followed, not much had changed in the state of the situation on Earth. Resources were still being overconsumed, staged conflicts to reduce population were never ending, and genocide of non-dominant ethnic and cultural groups had been routine. That was until January 1, 2310, when everything would begin to change, leaving nothing the same again. News coverage of this major event spread like wildfire all over the globe, some in fear and panic and others in rejoice. Every household in the 3 major nations quickly learned the news of a successful colony established on Neptune by the Eastern Empire. With mankind abandoning space exploration the past 200 years, this came as a surprise to everyone. People flooded the streets in a display of anarchy in the socialist European Union 4 years after the newsbreak of colonial advances by the Eastern Empire. The bands of revolutionaries shared a common agenda and blaming their long-standing communist governmental system as the downfall and disadvantage in expanding its frontiers as the Eastern Empire had. Alongside colonizing Neptune, the Easterners dominated trade and military power for the past 200 years on Earth. The only reason this weakened state of the socialist European Union was still standing today was because the Eastern Empire was focused elsewhere, launching and funding space colonization behind the scenes. When this news got out, the European nation broke into a brutal conflict, thus beginning the first major regime change on the globe in centuries. Revolutionaries quickly stormed the governmental buildings and headquarters of the nation and executed anyone trying to stop them. This was all followed closely by journalists from both the Humankind Empire and Eastern Empire. With the toppling of the communist regime, came an insurgence of royalists aiming to take charge of the nation. With no central government holding the nation together, the territories broke into an all-out civil war. The royalists who supported a monarchy and the republicans who supported the establishment of a republic. While the Eastern Empire was off exploring the next frontier, what was left of the European nation was in all-out war. The royalists' capital city and temporary government was stationed in Gibraltar on the Iberian Peninsula, and the temporary government of the republicans was stationed in Moscow. Once both sides organized their militaries, the first offensive began in the summer of 2314. The royalists quickly occupied the area of Tunisia in North Africa, along with taking the islands of Sardinia and Corsica via various naval landings. Meanwhile, the Republicans in the first couple months of the conflict pushed into northern Scandinavia, where they were bogged down in the mountainous terrain, unable to make any breakthrough. The same issue occurred in the Caucasus region, where both sides attempted to make advances and were stunted due to mountainous terrain yet again. Despite these initial setbacks for the Republicans, they were able to solidify gains in the Far East. An investigation into the successful eastern advances by the Republicans had the Royalists discover that the Republican side was receiving firearms and ammunition from the Eastern Empire via high-speed rail networks from New Beijing to Moscow. This discovery caused an uproar in the Royalist forces. A proclamation was declared to strike any Eastern trade ship seen in nearby waters, along with any aircraft, automobile, and train entering in or nearby Royalist and Republican territory. Although nearly equal in territory and manpower, the Royalists had access to a much wider range of air and naval craft, giving them superiority in the sea and air. Along with this base of superiority arose something even far greater and more powerful, that being early prototypes of spaceships with orbital bombing capability. This technology was new and was being tested by the previous government based on spaceship designs stolen from the Humankind and Eastern Empire archives. In the days following the discovery of foreign intervention taking place on the side of the Republican Army, the Royalists took on a new strategy. Rather than wasting manpower bleeding away in mountains, they launched a barrage of space-to-Earth nuclear bombs from their spaceships. In a few minutes following the release of these bombs from space, came the annihilation of Paris, Rome, Dublin, Warsaw, and Mecca. This event would forever alter the political and social stability between the 3 powers on Earth, as the unthinkable just took place. Following the orbital bombardment of various cities under Republican control, The tide was beginning to shift decisively in the Royalists' favor through fall and into the early months of 2315. Breakthroughs occurred across the front lines of battlefields where chaos and low morale of Republican armies exploded. The Republican advances in Yemen and northern Scandinavia were pushed back, Ireland quickly fell under Royalist control, various landings occurred along the coasts of Italy, France was quickly split up, and the Republican land passageway in between Italy and Hungary was cut off. The cutoff stopped all supplies from funneling into France and Italy via land routes with no access to air or sea supremacy. These areas capitulated under Royalist pressure and surrendered their lands in late spring 2315. Summer and fall of 2315 were met with unopposed advances from all fronts in the east. Small skirmishes occurred along the advance route, but it seemed as if nothing was stopping the onslaught. Enemies were seen fleeing en masse to the far east into the Gobi Desert and past Moscow, abandoning their posts and front lines. Frustrated that the Republicans wouldn't fight and kept retreating infuriated the Royalists who were out for blood. This would drive them to commit firebombing and chemical warfare against the citizens of the Republican territories they advanced in. These events diplomatically isolated the Europeans evermore from the Humanic and Eastern empires. Following the successful advances in 2315, the war seemed to be concluding with the Royalists coming out on top. But, just as plentiful changes have occurred in the previous years of the conflict, an even greater world-shaking development would take place. The Eastern Empire, who had been previously caught in the act of supplying the Republican army with weapons and ammunition, had a communication intercepted by Royalist hackers. The message contained the following statement:
"Do not go gentle into that good night. Where there is Moscow, there is fire, and where there is fire, there is sure to be an inferno birthing a phoenix from its flames, thus sparking a new age. Do not go gentle into that good night."
Although this message was written and communicated in the abstract, signs of discontent grew in the siege of Moscow. Some Royalist troops began to disobey orders and push into the city. Reporters from all over the European Royalist territories entered the city to try and decode this mysterious communication. The millions of soldiers and journalists that entered the city faced an empty and abandoned concrete jungle. There was nothing but building after building lining the city streets with no person to be seen for miles. People began to question and stir an uproar in the streets with the soldiers shouting,
"The enemy abandoned their capital. We won."
While journalists pondered,
"Why does it seem like nobody has been here in months when we've kept this place surrounded and under siege ever since our arrival in Eastern Europe? Where did they all go? Why is there little to nothing left behind, leaving the buildings empty shells? If people were to evacuate in a hurry, why weren't there some items left behind by accident? Why? Why?"
Before the journalist could finish his pondering, a bright light illuminated the night sky. It seemed as though an artist who changed their mind depicting a night sky in a painting wanted to go back and paint over the dark shades of black, gray, and blue with lighter colors with golden and light blue tones. Burn, 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 everything in an instant began to dissipate on an atomic level until there was nothing left but a crater to be seen by news drones circling the city from above. Soon after, these too became part of the light that encompassed the city. Moscow had been destroyed and everyone in it vaporized from existence. What had occurred had been an elaborate trap set months prior. The Republican forces had all retreated to the Far East and sought refuge in joining the Eastern Empire. The Republicans had abandoned all their cities and front lines in order to pursue a fresh start in the Asian-based empire. They were received not just with open arms, but a common goal. That being to achieve revenge on the Royalists for the atrocities they have committed. The Eastern Empire had trade routes and merchant ships hijacked and destroyed throughout the entirety of the conflict by the Royalists. Meanwhile, the Republicans had the Royalists as an enemy since the fall of the old communist regime. The Republican and Eastern Empire's top officials sat down together in a war room and set a plan in motion to completely humiliate the Royalists. Their plan was to make the Royalists seem like they are facing weak opposition and dominating in the war so much to overextend their forces to siege the capital of the previous Republican territory in Moscow. With confusion and hysteria after walking into the empty city put under siege months prior and an elaborate leak of their information to Royalist hackers, the Eastern Empire influenced civilians and journalists to also migrate to investigate the city. With the streets filled with Royalists, both military and civilian, the order was given to launch 10 nuclear missiles from spaceships orbiting the planet. Within 3 minutes, the whole of Moscow was nothing but a crater around half the size of the Black Sea. Following this, the Eastern Empire released a broadcast claiming responsibility for this act of destruction. The Empire warned the Royalists that this nuclear capability can be used again if the Royalists were to retaliate with their own nuclear arsenal. The Civil War came to a close with over 250 million casualties, 30 million of which were caught in the blast in and around Moscow. With the weakened state of the European nation, the Humanic Empire pounced on the vulnerable royalists, annexing their northern African provinces. The Eastern Empire annexed sections of their eastern territory to keep them at bay if they ever aimed to avenge the fallen from the Moscow bombing. The war finally came to a close and the balance and stability on the planet had been restored. The Royalist Union was now an established monarchy. Next, our story moves into space as the three empires look to expand among the cosmos. Chapter 4: The New Frontier. The decades succeeding the bloody European Civil War conflict had men turned from each other and their quarrels on Earth to the stars. Great prosperity and developments were underway throughout the three empires. Construction of colossal colony ships, spaceships, and new weapons had more and more people believing that the future of man is no longer bound to the mother planet of Earth. The colony on Neptune grew to house millions of people as the Eastern Empire continued to fund immigration initiatives to make their empire multiplanetary. Following this model in the year 2356 CE, 40 years after the European Civil War, the Humanic Empire colonized the planet Venus. 2 years later, the Eastern Empire and the Royalist Union both colonized the planet of Mars in 2358 CE. Shortly after colonizing the planet, there was constant sabotage done to both colonies between the rival civilizations that mysteriously led to the imploding of the planet, thus causing the loss of hundreds of millions of lives in the process. Some say it was the overmining on the planet, while others speculate some sort of internal combustion done by the Eastern Empire. The colonies on Mars were only there for about 30 years, which is all it took to destroy a planet that had been around for millions upon millions of years. Is this the fate of humanity? To go planet to planet destroying it beyond recognition? Or is there some deeper meaning and purpose to us as a species? Nobody seems to be able to answer this question. Alongside the colonization and destruction of Mars, the Humanic Empire continued expanding its colonial empire to Mercury. This expansion to the planet nearest to the Sun was a daring expedition. The colony, which had been claimed impossible to establish, is now one of the most prosperous trading planets for minerals and raw energy. The planet houses huge fields of solar panels working at full capacity, making all other sources of fuel for the Humanic Empire irrelevant. Everything from toasters to spaceships in the Empire were now powered by solar-charged fuel batteries manufactured and shipped from the industrial planet of Mercury. Along with this heightened resource utilization, the Humanic Empire became more comfortable than ever before with its power and sovereignty separate from the Royalist Union and Eastern Empire. At the same time, there were constant trade disputes and inner conflicts stirred between the other two empires. The Humanic Empire was using its newly acquired excess capabilities. These capabilities arose after resolving the issue of energy and having sufficient mineral resources to construct even greater spaceships. The Humanics began building the first ever warship-class spaceship with the construction of corvettes. Soon after, even grander ships such as destroyers and frigates were built. The Empire was reaching new heights, and by the year 2400 CE they felt no need to stay on the mother planet any longer. They left Earth for the Eastern Empire and Royalist Union, who quickly took control of their abandoned territories. The ships were now capable of holding and transporting billions of people, and the colonies on Venus and Mercury grew into the billions as well. New developments took place within the Empire, and they soon discovered a way to harness energy from a planet's molten core to power FTL, faster-than-light, travel capabilities. The warp drives first developed by the Humanic Empire sparked a new age of space exploration and gave humanity an even greater opportunity to travel and live amongst the stars. Maps were drawn in space as if a common map with nations and borders was being drawn of Earth. Early records of experiments resulted in nothing but disaster when running tests with the newly discovered FTL travel outside of the home system. FTL worked great in the Earth system and was frequently used for quick travel and transportation. The warp drives developed by the Humanic Empire were sold off to the Royalist Union and Eastern Empire in order to retain positive relations between the three empires. With these FTL warp drive ships, humankind could now travel from Earth to Mars in approximately 3 minutes and to the furthest areas of the system, to Pluto, which took under 4 hours. With this great scientific breakthrough and exchange of knowledge, the three empires continued to establish themselves to the far reaches of the solar system. The Eastern Empire was shown to have an interest in expanding long distances within the solar system, which had resulted in their colony on Neptune being long established and a space station named Pluto Prima orbiting Pluto. This station was packed full with around 2.5 billion people and was the size of Earth's moon. The 2400s were relatively peaceful. Conflict was now non-existent on Earth as all tensions between the Eastern Empire and Royalist Union fizzled out as the two became worrisome of the progress made by the Humanic Empire. With their departure from Earth and the primary focus being on Venus and Mercury, the quickly growing population of the Humanic Empire would pose a massive issue if a solid resolution wasn't developed in a timely manner. Both planets were stable for a while, but with this great prosperity coming to the Empire, came an uncontrollable spike in population growth. This crisis propelled the Empire's research and tests to reach other systems more than ever and would be their primary focus in honing in and developing during this century. At this point, the Earth has been harvested for nearly all its resources. The stability of the core, which has been slowly harvested over the 2400s, led to worry among the planet's inhabitants, thus sparking worldwide protests and worker strikes demanding for something to be done to stop this resource extraction on the planet. This arose out of fear of what had previously occurred on Mars between the Eastern Empire and Royalist Union, who overmined the core of the planet, leading to its implosion. Where there is no longer a sufficient core, there no longer exists the capacity to retain a planetary structure. The Earth was now a place to hold population and farm food. Mining as of 2480 CE was now prohibited by the Easterners and Royalists on Earth. Chapter 5 Breakthrough. The year is now 2500 CE, 100 years after the development of the first FTL warp drives. The population of humanity broke 50 billion throughout the three empires. Trade ships are commonplace from planet to planet in the solar system. The past 100 years were a time of build-up, technological breakthroughs, and economic development. Earth, becoming more overpopulated, has it full of urban sprawl. The greenery of the past has faded and the oceans have been almost entirely drained as water has been processed into clean drinking water and moved to other planets for terraforming processes. The Humanic Empire was the leader in technological development among the three civilizations, and it had its sights outside of the solar system onto brighter and new horizons. Following thousands of failed experiments and attempts in reaching another solar system by FTL spaceships, hundreds of thousands of lives were sacrificed for scientific breakthroughs. Attaining the goal of having these ships not combust or lose contact traveling between systems seemed like an unachievable dream. Is the destiny of man to be confined to the solar system, only allowing the species to live off of the few, mostly inhospitable, planets the system offers, or is there a chance for something far greater? This question pondered the human race for hundreds of years to this point where attempts have been made in expanding beyond these restrictive horizons. Is humanity the lone light of civilization in this whole galaxy that seems to be dark and only lit up with the stars that are seen in our night sky? We may never know if these stars even exist until we visit them. Our night sky could very well only show us all the stars that have passed on, leaving us as a sole flame in a dark, empty existence. In times of great despair and darkness, humanity will appear to collapse in on itself, leaving its dreams and ambitions to rot. But every time this sort of encounter occurred in the past or great despair rose, humanity had always overcome it and moved forward. One day, the capital of the Humanic Empire received a transmission from one of their experiments sent out 20 years prior. This was not sent via radio signals which humans have used up until now, but something far more clear and transparent, as if the person speaking to them was sitting just across a table at a conference. When this individual phoned in, he mentioned that him and his crew were unable to contact back to the HQ located on the planet Venus, in the capital of New DC. He began to describe their journey and current status. The news of this transmission spread like wildfire across all colonies and empires in the solar system. It reignited the human spirit to overcome adversity in becoming a space-faring species outside of their home system. The transmission contained the following conversation between those located in the Space Control HQ in New DC and those part of the Galactic Mayflower Voyager fleet. The Mayflower fleet captain, Vesuvius Exodus, starts off by saying,
"Hello, I don't know if anyone is hearing or receiving this, but know that we accomplished what we set out to do, and that we are alive and well. This is Vesuvius Exodus, and I am hoping that those in the New DC Space Travel Control HQ are receiving our message and communication. I am going to leave a pinging noise until someone reaches the computer I am connected to. Ding. 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 D.
Confirming communication. This is Space Control Headquarters located on the planet Venus. This is an essential confirmation before continuing our conversation. Can you please give us your Imperial ID registration number so that we may continue?
Confirming, this is Captain Vesuvius Exodus of the Galactic Mayflower Voyager fleet we took on our journey about 20 years ago. My confirmation code is 149-866-1927. Let me repeat, 149-866-1927. I am reaching out about our journey and wanted to report back.
Affirmative, user access is confirmed. It is amazing to hear back from you, Captain. Why haven't you contacted earlier? The time to travel to the system we set you on course for was meant to take only 2 years. We were under the impression here at HQ that you and your fleet had imploded or got lost at space.
We were as surprised as you are now. Along our route, we hit an issue flying into the system we were on course for. Many of our cruise ships meant for maintenance and repair fell out of our main colony ship's orbit, drifting off course and into the depths of space. Of our 25 ships, only 5 made it to the destination system's astro field. There, our communications could finally be sent as we were no longer in warp travel. But, right as we were attempting to communicate, our radios were intercepted by another source from the system we had just warped into. We could not understand a word. Whoever intercepted our message was trying to communicate, so we attempted all known languages on Earth to respond to them, including various species of mammalians from Earth, and still got nothing of a coherent response back. The best way we could have described the message at the time was a warped version of Latin tied in with the sounds of a reptilian tongue.
You made contact with another species? What was it? Where was it? Who was it? What are they like? What is happen?
Enough! Listen to what I have to say. I understand this is incredible news to hear and may blow all of you at headquarters away, but to comprehend what I am about to tell you, you must shut up and listen.
All right. Continue on, Captain.
Thank you. As I was saying, for weeks we tried to reach out to Venus in this asteroid field orbit via our radio systems, but every single time we tried it was intercepted. At this point our FTL energy was drained from our ship, and lacking fuel we were stuck in this orbit. Luckily enough, we had sufficient farms and supplies on the ship to last us for a couple more months. But if something didn't change, our 5 remaining ships full of humans were doomed for the same fate all interstellar travelers had before us: death and/or vanishing into the great unknown of the galaxy. About 2 months later, we had an incident occur where one of our ships drifted out of orbit and into an oncoming asteroid, killing everyone on board of the vessel in an instant. Those remaining on the other 4 ships began to panic and hoard the limited supply of food, and rationing was thrown out the window, leaving the fleet with around 1 week's worth of food left before starvation would begin to break out. As anarchy and disorder began to ensue, I considered taking my own life, as many of my friends have previously done on this journey so far. Blood staining the walls of the vessels was as common as metal used in the structure of the ships. Hundreds of people would take their life every day, and things looked dimmer and more dire with every passing day. Being the captain of such a tragedy made me lose all hope. Fed up with this situation and with overwhelming agony of being a failure not only to those in my crew and expedition, but to the whole human race, I began the steps in taking my own life. I pulled open a drawer one day and found my great-great-great-grandfather's revolver, designed after those in the long-forgotten Wild West days in the United States. I proceeded to load 1 round into the cylinder and spun it as hard as I could, put it to the roof of my mouth, and pulled the trigger. I would go on to pull the trigger once a day for the next 4 days. It seemed like something was keeping me alive at this point. If there was a God, it would have been trying to signal to me to not proceed any further by allowing me to live. But forget that. After this journey, at this point I lost all hope and belief in any higher power. This would be my final day. I know that, since I have pulled the trigger 5 times already and there has not been a round in any of them up to this point, and since there were 6 chambers, I knew, for a fact, that this one had the round I put in 5 days prior. I was still alive and lost all feeling in my fingers from dehydration and malnutrition. More than half of my ship turned to cannibalize one another as the food reserves ran out. I was in hell. The only way to escape this hell was death. As I began to squeeze the trigger, I glanced through the front window of the ship and stared at the giant red star these asteroids orbited around. The red giant had an ominous and intriguing look to it, and so I held the trigger pulled halfway to ignition, until I caught a glimpse of some unidentifiable objects that appeared within the light emanating off the red star. These figures got closer and closer and began to look as though they were space vessels. I thought I had begun hallucinating and began screaming to myself. Ha 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 ha, as if anyone would come and save us. Earth is too far away and our communications are still being intercepted even today. What good is there left to live for? At this point, tears filled my eyes and I couldn't see a thing. I took one long last breath and exhaled as I pulled the trigger. The last thing I heard was an ear-piercing bang.
So if the Vesuvius Exodus we knew before killed himself, who are we talking to now? Who are you and what is your identity? How do you know what he was doing? Were you just standing by watching the captain lose his mind and drift into insanity? What kind of person does that?
Listen. I am Vesuvius Exodus and I am still alive. I didn't mean to leave you waiting, but I needed a drink of water with this long story I've been telling. My throat was beginning to itch. As I was saying earlier, the last noise I heard was a loud bang and it was from my revolver, but as I squeezed the trigger, a massive shockwave hit my ship and I was thrown out of the way of the bullet's path and slammed against a wall. Those around me explained it knocked me out completely. I woke up in what I believed to be a dream and opened my eyes to a blurry figure that looked as though to have a massive muscular build, as though it were a sculpture carved from marble in the ancient Roman Empire of the past. I blinked 4 or 5 times and rubbed my eyes. At this point I knew this wasn't a dream as it felt all too physically realistic. I looked up one more time. Now my vision was more clear and what stood before me was 4-7 or so feet tall creatures with 3 legs and 2 arms, a thin waist and a head around double the size of a normal human's. This thing was coated in a thick-looking skin tinted a very faint purple. It was speaking in that Latin and reptilian-sounding language I previously mentioned. Then it looked at me, dead in the eyes, showing its dark red glowing eyes. The next thing I knew before I could comprehend fully what had just occurred or what was currently going on, it spoke, not in that messy barbaric language it was speaking earlier, but in perfect English. As I sat there bewildered, it switched to speaking Spanish, French, Mandarin, Japanese, German, Dolphin. I was blown away while it was cycling through all these in front of me. At that moment, I didn't know what to say until I finally stood up after an hour of it going through various dialects and languages saying, "How in the hell do you know how to speak all of that and who are you? Do you come from Earth or somewhere else? Am I alive or have I passed on into the afterlife? Is this hell or is this heaven? Where am I?" The creature responded.
My name is Vajra Center, and I am part of the royal Zenturian bloodline. I hail from the planet Zenter, the great red masterpiece in the center of our system. A planet so big it acts as star emitting light and energy to the planets that revolve around it, a truly masterful world home to a masterful race known as the Zenturians. You are currently located on your ship, but it has been transported to my planet a couple of weeks ago. Apologies for our late arrival. Our starcraft are relatively new and cannot travel the speed or efficiency that your vessels have to get here. We know all these languages that you would describe as earthly. My species was working on translating your original messages that we intercepted a couple of months ago, and since then have obtained whole dictionaries and language guides on your 4 spaceships, allowing us to master all your dialects and languages in the past couple of weeks. Our superior learning ability is gifted to us by this great and bountiful planet, and our brains that are twice the size of a normal human brain may play a key role in our species' superiority. But what I want to know is how your species, which seems to be extremely inferior to ours and closer to your primates on Earth than to us, was able to make it all the way out here. How is this possible? Upon closer examination, many of your subjects recovered from your ships showed a barbaric nature and were thirsting for the blood and skin of my crew, which led to us executing hundreds upon contact. But despite these few barbaric creatures, there were those willing to cooperate and talk with us. They told us of your history as humans until now, and the secrets of your technologies that were long a mystery to us, including the technology of your core harvesting plants on the planets of Mercury and Venus in the solar system, which allowed you to harness maximized energy capabilities for the development of FTL travel. Truly remarkable how your inferior species can be so barbaric and animalistic.
The travel was a success then? You arrived on a foreign planet with a highly intelligent civilization known as the Zenturians. Shall we come and provide a rescue mission? Our ships have batteries that far surpass the capability and ability of the ones you went out with almost 20 years ago. We will be right there.
Hold it right there. I am only communicating back to you as a mediator. I am informing you that the Zenturians have studied, adapted, and updated all previous human technologies over these past 2 decades since I have been missing. In collaboration with the humans that survived and made it to Zentar, came the debt we owed to their species for saving what was left of our crew. In return, we gave them all our knowledge and assistance and even began participating in crossbreeding and gene manipulation programs. You see, I nearly died when I made contact with the wall inside my spaceship, and so did many others on the ship, but I was brought back to life out of my coma by the medical advances made by this species. They transplanted their species' unique organs into my body and made it function better than ever, also allowing myself and those on my crew who survived the test procedures to fully utilize 100% of their human brain capacity. I and all the humans who have been living here for some time now have been transformed into superhuman mutants mixed between Zenturian and human. With the desires and overwhelming ambitions of humans mixed with the superior build and intellectual capacity of the Zenturians, our species will never be the same. As I speak to you now, there are ships warping to the solar system from Zentar. I am a part of leading this fleet mixed with warships and transport ships. These ships have the FTL ability to travel system to system in a matter of days compared to the multiple years it took human ingenuity to put together, along with modifications made to system issues with distance, energy costs and efficiency in travel, weapon upgrades across the board, and, of course, extremely advanced communication. Humanity as it is no longer the future of the Humanic Empire, but rather a stepping stone, just as the base Zenturian was to their own civilization. We are on our way back to grab every human in the Humanic Empire to join in with the Zenturians on Zentar. Zentar is our future and is our god. Worship the Great Red Giant or remain the equivalent to a monkey in the solar system. It is your choice. We are the future now.
Chapter 6, Evolutionary Ascension. The transmission blasted loudly on the computer and was left on repeat as the men in the HQ quickly scurried around the complex in a frenzy. They ran around the hall screaming the news that an alien fleet was inbound and warping into the solar system, and that measures must be taken to secure the future of not only the Humanic Empire, but the future of humanity. The Zenturian fleet, led by previous pureblood human Vesuvius Exodus, arrived just outside of the planet Jupiter. Alarms were blaring on all Humanic Empire planets. Red alert! Red alert! Potential conflict with foreign invaders. Red alert! Red alert! The transmission received at the HQ in New DC, Venus broadcasted to all other radio systems across all human colonies and space stations throughout the solar system in all three empires. The information was out there for all those to receive. The streets of New DC quickly filled with mixed crowds, some submitting to the idea of these foreign aliens looking to proceed with transmutation and breeding their kind out of existence. Meanwhile, others were opposed and up in arms already. Vesuvius was no longer human, nor was he a pure-blooded Zenturian, but rather a new species known as Proxima Centauri. Proxima Centauri are artificially created and genetically perfected humans mixed with the blood of Zenturians. Through years of experiments and crossbreeding, this species is the ideal galactic Ubermensch that would knock past philosopher Nietzsche out of his seat. The planet they came from is no longer governed solely by Zenturians but, rather, led and dominated by a social caste system with the Proxima Centauri at the top. Not all humans could become this new elite species or produce offspring capable of becoming it, thus leading to the deaths of thousands on the planet during its trialing periods. The success rate of a human becoming a Proxima Centauri was 1 in 80 and was found to only succeed with the most talented, intelligent, and physically fit humans. A normal Zenturian was already quite superior in their learning ability and physical state compared to that of normal humans, but they were missing the undying spirit of humanity and the deep-rooted emotional power that built the foundation for all human achievement and progress. Combining these two would truly create an unstoppable force. The Zenturian Empire seeks to assimilate those within the Humanic Empire from the solar system to grow their empire and gather more qualified candidates to become Proxima Centauri. Therefore, their goal is to relocate all humans from the Humanic Empire to their planet Zentar and to force the humans to join into their caste system society. The Zenturian fleet sent out a communication to the militaries and commanding offices of the Royalist Union, Eastern Empire, and Humanic Empire.
Attention all leaders and commanders of humankind. My name is Commander Vesuvius. I am sure you got my message previously, and I am certain it was relayed across all your worlds and stations by now. I hope to remain transparent to you about our movements. We are currently on course for Venus and will arrive within a few minutes. Our forces are going to make landings across the planet to oust the current ruling body and to peacefully evacuate and abandon these worlds to resettle these populations on the mother world, Zentar, the heart of the Zenturian system. This can be kept cold or this can turn hot quickly. That decision is yours and yours alone. Either way, our mission is to extract those within the Humanic Empire and the Humanic Empire alone. As a previous citizen of the Empire, I hope this can be done efficiently with as little bloodshed as possible. My message to the Eastern Empire and Royalist Union is this: stay out of our way and we will continue to allow your nations to operate independently and separately from the Zenturian Empire. There is also a sizable break-off fleet strike force planned to orbit the populations on Earth, Earth's moon, and Neptune. They are peacekeeping forces. Do not engage. Your cooperation will not go unnoticed. For your efforts of retaining peace and withholding intervention in this matter, I will advocate for a substantial amount of your populations to migrate to the Zenturian system to colonize new worlds habitable for the human species. We also promise to lend over blueprints for the retouched warp drives, which can allow your travel capabilities to accelerate and match our own. Hail Zentaur!
The break-off fleets in orbit over Neptune, Earth, and the Moon had no disruptions and all remained quiet as the Eastern Empire and Royalist Union agreed to Commander Vesuvius' offer. Earth was the only planet that the Royalist Union had population on. Receiving this offer of colonization rights of new worlds in a far-off system is comparative to winning the lottery in their stance as the weakest power of the solar system's civilizations. For the Eastern Empire, this was a great opportunity to finally do away with their old rival in power, the Humanic Empire, thus opening the door for them to seize power as the dominant force in the solar system. Gaining access to new technology, as well as access to colonization rights, gave them ideas of leading a new edge for galactic domination. But for now they are playing it off quietly as they are severely outmatched in comparison to the Zenturian Empire. The opposite was occurring throughout the Humanic Empire, where the HQ in New DC had a red alert warning in place and began to dispatch the largest organized human force to intercept the oncoming fleet towards Venus. Thus, beginning one of the first spaceship-to-spaceship battles ever recorded. The Humanic fleet was led by Joseph Ceremos and contained 52 corvettes, 4 destroyers, 1 frigate, 2 cruisers, and 1 battleship. The incoming Zenturian force was a fleet led by Commander Vesuvius Exodus, who was in a flagship battleship-classed vessel. Vesuvius' fleet contained around 25 corvettes, 8 destroyers, 6 frigates, 4 cruisers, and 7 battleships. The battle began with the Humanics making the first move on the approaching Zenturian fleet. Fearing a future encirclement, Ceremos commanded his large corvette formation on the Humanic right flank to engage the enemy's break-off force. The quick advance was met with heavy fire from the destroyers, cruisers, and battleships in the formation, decimating around half of the corvettes before they even reached contact distance. Once the corvettes reached the flanking force, they took down 2 Zenturian destroyers with ease and pushed into the center of the formation. What Ceremos didn't realize is that his corvettes had mobility, but lacked enough firepower to make any significant breakthrough. So, when they entered the center of the right flank's formation, they were quickly surrounded and tied down under superior Zenturian firepower. While this push occurred on the right flank, the Zenturians didn't hesitate and moved up their left and center formation to engage the Humanic positions. They maneuvered corvettes in front of their frigates and destroyers in this advance, while providing cover fire from their battleships and cruisers which held back their approach. Their forefront was quick, and the corvettes attracting most of the Humanic firepower allowed the frigates and destroyers of the Zenturian fleet to reach the battle unscathed. The sacrifice of more than half of the Zenturian corvettes was planned to distract the Humanic firepower so that the Zenturian heavier-class ships could overpower their formations once engaged. With all the Humanic forces tied up in battle, there was no opportunity for their ships to reform. The corvette force was mowed down on the right flank, not leaving a single corvette to escape the encirclement. With this annihilation of the corvettes on the right flank, the front was now wide open and the Zenturians pressed this advantage, hitting the tied-up remainder of the Humanic forces. With the arrival of the Zenturian right flank force, came the encirclement of the whole Humanic fleet with nowhere to escape except back onto the planet Venus. The Humanic forces managed to shoot down all the Zenturian corvettes, but the frigates and destroyers quickly replaced them and retained the encirclement. As the Zenturians advanced, 1 Humanic cruiser disobeyed orders and began to flee back to Venus. The capitulation and collapse of the Humanic forces at this point in the battle seemed inevitable. With the retreating cruiser and the chaos of overwhelming firepower ripping through their ships one by one, the battle appeared to be a lost cause. As the laser fire continued from both sides, Joseph Ceremos broadcasted to both the enemy and his own fleet along with the global radio station of Venus. In this broadcast he went on announcing,
"To all those listening and tuning in, this has been the last stand for human supremacy against the Zenturian threat. Myself and my brothers in arms gave it our best and put our lives on the line in defense of our nation, but at this point in the battle, this battle is a lost cause. The men who died today did not die in vain. Their sacrifice will forever be remembered, as they are the select few who stood up against this apocalyptic threat facing our kind. Just now, our vessel was struck directly in our supporting engines and our ship is now immobile. It is only a matter of time before the enemy begins to board this ship to take me as a prisoner. What I want to make clear is that this is not my destiny. My destiny has always been in service of the great Humanic Empire until the day I die standing up for its people and independence. Now today is the day my service is done. Goodbye."
The battleship which held Commander Joseph Ceremos self-destructed, bringing down multiple enemy destroyers and frigates. This explosion took the lives of every man on the flagship who had previously agreed, before boarding, to sacrifice themselves if need be. The blast from the detonation encompassed the nearest friendly cruiser and frigate. Following the explosion, the remaining forces of the Humanic Empire and the two destroyers still engaged in combat relayed messages stating their formal surrender to the Zenturian forces, but were ignored by Commander Vesuvius Exodus and shot down. The only survivors of the Humanic forces were those on the cruiser that fled earlier in the battle, which Vesuvius claimed were
the only intelligent opponents we had today. I respected the courage of those souls that fought and died today on both sides, but they are truly fools for believing they had any sort of chance in standing up against the all-powerful Zenturian Empire.
Those on the destroyers were seen as weak-minded fools who deserved to die, and anyone with any amount of Zenturian blood wouldn't have accepted their surrender. With this, the Battle of Venus came to an end. The Zenturian Empire secured a decisive victory over the Humanic Empire with the superior battle tactics and firepower that won them this engagement. Following this great upset, the population of Venus and its administration quickly submitted to the authority of the invaders. With the surrender of Venus, Mercury's population soon followed, and great resettlement was now underway. In the next months, all previous government officials and military leaders were forced into testing programs to measure their physical ability, special talents, and intelligence. Those who were not deemed worthy of becoming Proxima Centauri throughout the testing period received nothing but death. They could not volunteer to be left out of the testing as a commoner human was able to do. They either performed or died. This testing period led to the execution of 96% of the fallen civilization's government officials, intellectuals, generals, and members of the elite class. Those that survived were to be bred with Centurions back on Centaur to produce the next generation of Proxima Centauri. This advanced species mixed between human and Zenturian superiors had an average height of 7 foot, a muscular build far surpassing the best bodybuilders found among humans, an insane IQ with the ability to access 100% of their brain power, and long natural lifespans lasting up to around 150 years on average, compared to the average Zenturian, which is around 100 years, and the average human, which is 80 years. This elite species is the best of the best in the Zenturian Empire, but also makes up the smallest portion of the population, roughly 5% of the total population, making these individuals extremely valuable. Those that found themselves in this social class were given the best healthcare, bodyguards, and resources available to live on and lead a successful life, as well as administrative positions across the planet of Centaur. For reference, Vesuvius Exodus at the time of the Solar System campaign was 48 years old, and since he was an artificially created Proxima Centauri, and not a natural-born one, his lifetime expectancy is around 110 years. The goal for all humans now part of the Zenturian Empire was to either become a Proxima Centauri or to breed enough to potentially produce offspring who one day could be capable enough of becoming one. This led to a huge population spike among all those within the Empire, as the Zenturians already had this goal and were eager for the arrival of more humans following the resettlement program that was now underway. As the final batches of humans from the Humanic Empire were evacuated from their homes on Venus and Mercury in the year 2508 CE, the Zenturian fleet and transport vessels carrying around 15 billion humans to Centaur was not traveling alone. The Royalist Union had equipped their vessels with the new warp drive technology and abandoned their territory on Earth to follow the Zenturian fleet to their system in hopes for a fresh start. The Eastern Empire kept their territory and a good amount of their population on Earth, the Moon, and Neptune, but ended up joining the Great Migration to the Zenturian system in 2510 CE. From here on out, the human calendar was replaced with the Zenturian calendar. The Zenturian era calendar began its first year in 2500 CE of the human calendar alongside the invasion and abduction of the Humanic Empire and its citizens. The year was now 10Z, standing for Zenturian era, not too different from the modern human calendar referring to their current year as Common Era. Chapter 7, Interstellar Civilizations. The Great Migration to the Zenturian system brought about a whole new era, forever shaping the future of the galaxy. The Eastern Empire was given permission by the Zenturian Empire upon their arrival to colonize 2 untouched planets in the system, that being Glarvis and Yavis. Along with this, the Empire was given access to settle on the planet Centaur as it offered an extremely wide surface area. Galactic Centaur, 86 years old, known as the Generous Emperor, is the current leader of Centaur and the Zenturian Empire. His son, Prince Vigirus, 48 years old, is next in line for the throne. Vigirus is promised the title of Emperor as the eldest of 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Glarvis was a planet coated in a thick exposed stone mantle with lava oceans. The Zenturians informed them that this planet was previously a green world such as Earth. One day an asteroid came flying out from unknown space, slamming on the edge of the planet, ripping off the greenery and burning up the oceans. The crust depleted away and was cast off into space. Once the carnage was over, all that was left of the planet now was coated in a layer of stone and lava, with the previous asteroid now orbiting the planet as its moon. This event was popular in early Zenturian history and was passed on from generation to generation from when the species was in its pre-Iron Ages. Yavis, on the other hand, is a freezing cold, desolate world completely covered in snow but is said to have rich minerals buried beneath it. The Eastern Empire aimed to extract as many of these minerals as they possibly could to continue construction of their fleet and space stations. This planet had an odd tilt that kept it from getting much light. Being farther away from Zentaur made it unbearably cold. It was about the distance the Earth is to the Sun in the solar system. With so little heat and light given off from the planet-centered system, to find a non-frozen world, a planet would have to be within Mercury distance to the Sun in the solar system. The Goldilocks zone in this system contained the planets of Glarvis, Luxus, and Fluna. The outer reaches of the system, which were ice-cold and had little to no light and heat, were Yavis and Frostbite. With the expansion onto these new worlds, the Eastern Empire rebranded themselves as the Varsan Alliance. The Royalist Union was given the colonization rights of Luxus. The planet currently housed a species known as the Topians, who the Zenturians deemed as inferior to themselves as pests. The Royalist Union sent dispatches out into the cities of the Topians located in the more tropical climates they lived in and discovered infrastructure and cities built much more advanced than had been by humans on Earth. The population seemed peaceful and unarmed, as if they have never seen conflict before. The species was quite reptile-like with scales covering their bodies, but similar builds to humans. They communicated in a strange-sounding language, and the Royalist Union quickly taught them English, French, Spanish, and German, their primary languages. Seeing little to no competition on the planet, the Royalist Union renamed the planet Neue Erde, which translates to New Earth in German. Neue Erde held all those a part of the Union, and they looked to control everything happening on the world. They began to clear out huge forests and began to mine the untapped core and mantle of the world for all it had to offer. The Topians became frustrated with this violation of their home world, but as a non-violent and demilitarized people, they avoided interfering and stopping their new neighbors. Along with the Topians, there existed two other space-faring civilizations in the Zenturian system. The Balians, a species with short white hair covering their whole bodies to keep them warm on their freezing cold planet, Frostbite. Like the Topians, they have a similar build with 2 arms and 2 legs like humans, but have the appearance of a polar bear man walking on its 2 back legs. On the planet Fluna lives the Judarian civilization that has a species with blue skin and large heads. They appeared as though they were a stereotypical portrayal of what humans believed alien species looked like before encountering any other form of extraterrestrial life forms. Fluna is an ocean world and its surface is 98% water. There are millions of species of fish and aquatic life on the planet, with small islands spread throughout. These islands hold the entire population of the Judarian civilization, as they are the only species on the planet that evolved from the water to the land. Like the Topians, the Judarians and Balians were a peaceful people and were content with their home worlds. The Zenturians had a higher respect for the Judarians and Balians and frequently engaged in trade with the two civilizations. They exchanged resources and technology with one another, which helped all the civilizations prosper while leaving the Topians isolated. Since the Topians had a great roll of the dice with a lush green world which had no struggle to face in survival, they earned no respect from Zentaur. In contrast to the Topians, the other two civilizations had to overcome adversity living in much harsher environments. The Judarians frequently overcame floods and tropical storms, and the Balians survived harsh winters and apocalyptic blizzards every season. This intelligence and might shown by these two civilizations earned the respect from those on Zentaur as near equals. But once breeding programs were attempted in the past between these species, they overwhelmingly resulted in death and failure. The only exceptions existed between those of Zenturian royalty blood. With the incorporation of humans on Zentaur, there has finally been successful crossbreeding and genetic mixing programs, opening a new opportunity for the small and ambitious empire. For all their history so far, the Zenturian people were content with staying as a single planet species, but all of this was soon going to change. Zentaur has plenty of resources, land, and people to last an eternity. If a planet has everything an empire could dream of or wish for, why would they look outward for expansion? The primary focus in the present is with the arrival of humans on the world to be incorporated as citizens and to crossbreed to create a new generation of Proxima Centauri. Alongside this, there is an ongoing population boom occurring on the planet and new mining initiatives underway to construct a stronger space fleet to demonstrate their power to all other civilizations. Chapter 8, Varsan Zenturian Rivalry. The arrival of human nations independent from Zentaur's control stirred much debate among the Zenturian people. With the Humanic Empire and its population fully absorbed into the Empire and living on the Great Red Planet, conversation around Galactic Centaur, the generous emperor, and his decision to allow the Eastern Empire, now known as the Varsan Alliance, and the Royalist Union to remain independent sparked controversy. In addition to the controversial move, the emperor made an even more taboo decision. Galactus put forth an executive decree that gave up around 25% of the land area of Zentaur for the human-led civilization of the Varsan Alliance along with 2 planets in the system. Accompanying this decision, yet another human civilization was given territory on the planet now known as Noi Erda, greatly upsetting the native population of Topians, who believed humanity to be a destructive plague toward their planet. Both these decisions were made behind closed doors and were put into action solely by Galactus, blindsiding all those in the Zenturian system, including members of his own family. For the first time in the history of their planet, the native population of Zentar not only shares their home with another species, but a separate independently governed nation. The spread of the Varsan alliance on Glarvis, Yavis, and Zentar brought great prosperity to the civilization. New technologies were discovered and helped modernize the Varsan fleet, and cities were spread across their new colonies, quickly growing in population. The planets they found themselves on were bountiful in resources, leading to a golden age of progress for the nation and its people. Unlike the other spacefaring civilizations who focused on developing themselves solely in the Zenturian system, the Varsan alliance shipped most of their resources mined on Zentar, Glarvis, and Yavis to the solar system. There they had full control over the Earth, a colony on Neptune, and a massive space station orbiting Pluto. Unlike the Royalist Union and Old Humanic Empire, the Varsan alliance decided it wanted to stay on Earth. Although the planet offered no mineral value, it did make up in being a habitable world for humans and was the breadbasket that fed the Varsan alliance's people across all their worlds. The construction of newly equipped space stations occurred from 10 to 25Z on Earth and were sent to orbit the planet of Neptune. Neptune, to the Varsan alliance, was the main military and manufacturing hub of the Empire. By 30Z the planet was orbited by 3 space stations the size of Earth's moon, holding billions of people. Alongside these space stations, a state-of-the-art shipyard was constructed on the planet, where construction of the largest and most complex ships ever seen were built and tested for battle readiness. The most notable of these ships constructed in the 30s was the Surrogate, which has the length of the diameter of the planet Neptune. The Surrogate was built with the installation of hangar bays for space fighters and landing craft, orbital bombardment artillery, nuclear missile silos, eau-de-défense turrets capable of intercepting missiles, advanced shields to hold off significant amount of laser fire, a mile-thick hull, and the best of the best laser batteries. Anyone in the way of this ship would face apocalyptic levels of annihilation. When news of the rollout of this revolutionary space vessel reached public communications, all civilizations began to grow more worrisome of the rising power of the Varsan alliance, especially those within the Zenturian Empire. The Surrogate departed from the solar system, warping into the orbit of Zentar, where it would remain the next 10 years. The ship revolving around Zentar was regularly observed among those on the surface, and negative sentiment began to spread about the Varsan among the Zenturian populace. This negativity made its way into the royal halls of the leading Zentur family. Galactus didn't see the issue with the rise of the Varsan, and instead he often congratulated them on their advances. He held celebrations throughout various cities to show them respect for constructing such a massive and complex ship. These celebrations raged on in 35Z until one day a massive explosion took the lives of thousands of people marching in one of the parades. The rising tension between the Varsan and Zenturians continued to spread not only empire to empire, but individual to individual. The polarization even made its way into the royal family. With growing destabilization across Zentar, Galactus finally began to take action to quell the rising terrorist threats. He pulled back from public celebrations and instead reserved celebrating the achievements of the Varsan to his own home. This kept the terrorist threat and loss of life in the city streets little to nothing, but continued to further the division in the royal family, who had split opinions on the matter and what to do about the rising power seen with the Varsan alliance. Prince Vigirus, next in line for the throne, was the most discontent with this situation. His views were aligned the opposite of his father's. In the cities he ruled over as a lord, he was relentless in his methods and shut down all attempts that celebrated the Varsan achievements with organized death squadrons. Feeling the split not only among the people of Zentar, but with his family as well, he held a deep hatred and resentment towards the Varsan alliance. He saw them as purposely dividing his family and the people in their empire, all while leeching off the success of them in their bountiful planet Zentar. In his view, his father was too weak for the throne, and Vigirus was now counting the days till he passed away so that he could finally stick up for his people and family legacy. In the provinces Vigirus governed, he discreetly began to siphon resources and a decent percentage of his family's funds into the construction of planet-to-orbit artillery in all his cities, conscription of the youth into good citizen training programs, where he brainwashed the next generation to hate the Varsan, and built up an even larger space fleet. This would continue throughout the 30s into the early 40s. By 40Z, his father, Emperor Galactus, had just turned 116 years old and Vigirus was now 78. The average Zenturian lives to approximately 100 years old. So while Galactus outlived the average, Vigirus began to worry and go through a midlife crisis, common for Zenturians in their 70s, feeling as though he had not achieved much in his life, as his father had been on the throne overshadowing him since he was born. Vigirus at this point had 1 Zenturian and 2 human wives with 4 Proxima Zenturi and 1 Zenturian offspring. The time was approaching when he soon would have the throne for himself and could make a lasting impression in the history of the empire. He aimed high and dreamed of leaving his own legacy and dynasty to forever shape the history of the galaxy. He could care less about his father, who he viewed as a pathetic and weak old man. With little to no patience left, Vigirus was sick of waiting around for his elderly father to pass away. One day he entered the room his father slept in and stood at the end of his bed. His father woke up with his wife Vigirus' mother beside him, both looking at Vigirus at the edge of the bed. Vigirus was wearing a dark black cloak and the guards by the door were nowhere to be seen. Vigirus' heavy breathing woke the couple and brought them great concern and confusion. All was quiet until Galactus broke out into maniacal laughter.
Bah-ha-ha! Cough, cough, cough! What brings you here, my son? Did you have trouble sleeping with all your wives in your bed? Did you want to come spend time with your mommy and papa? What is wrong? What brings you here now? Did you get sick? Don't tell me you threw up. You always used to get sick, cough, cough, sneeze. You always used to get sick in the middle of the night. Did it come back again? Did you?
The room fell silent for just a moment. Once that moment had passed, screeching erupted from Galactus. Covered in blood, he felt around his body but was in no physical pain. After turning to his left, he saw his wife's limp body with 2 holes in her chest.
Whoa, what the hell is going on? What did you just do? Are you out of your mind? What do you think this will accomplish, son? You just killed your own mother and what now? You're going to take me down as well? What got into you? Are you possessed by some sort of demon? You're my son, but what stands before me is a monster.
You and mother had plenty of years to live your lives. I have been waiting decades to take the throne, and I am not going to let some crazy old man who lost his mind run our great civilization into the ground. You're done. Today marks the beginning of a new age. The youth I have ruled will guide the future of this empire. Goodbye, father.
The 4 shots echoed in the chambers of the royal family. Vigirus took off back to his quarters, but left the skin of his brother's hand, who he killed earlier, on the firearm. Before entering the room of his parents, Vigirus thought it was wise to frame the assassination as a double homicide by his brother that ended in a suicide. The authorities and guards that showed up 35 minutes later to their posts found the body of Vigirus' brother in the hallway with the weapon next to his body. A single hole in his head and the emperor and his wife dead in their bed. Chaos spread like wildfire throughout the royal palace. Guards were panicking and the family was screaming and crying at the loss of their loved ones, even Vigirus. But whether these were real tears or not are up for debate. He could have been crying in regret for his decisions or crying simply to blend in. Either way, it helped turn any sort of suspicion away from him. 1 week later, the funeral reception for the violent passing of their mother, father, and suicidal brother was attended by Vigirus, his 1 remaining younger brother, and his 2 sisters. Immediately after the reception they followed the Zenturian tradition in burning the bodies in a massive bonfire surrounded by those close to them. They were the top generals of the empire, fleet commanders, talented Proximas and Turi, and wealthy elitist families in attendance. At the climax of the bonfire, Vigirus stepped in front of the fire onto a podium and began to speak to those around him.
The passing of my father, mother, and brother not only saddens me and breaks my heart, I am deeply frustrated. What happened to my brother that he would carry out such a heinous act of violence against those who brought him into existence? Whatever or whoever influenced this is unforgivable. But now it is a new age, the right to command this great empire is now my responsibility, and I will not let up until those who were responsible pay for what they have done to our family, our people, our planet, and our empire. The Varsan Alliance were the talk of our people for decades now and have created great rifts in our communities, even reaching my family. This murder-suicide would have never occurred in the first place if the Varsan presence was non-existent. Just by them living on our world, the great mother world of Zentur has been tainted by their mere existence. These disgusting inferior beasts should be banished from this world and back to where they came from. There was little to no issues prior to their arrival, and look at us now as we mourn the deaths of my beloved family members. In my reign as emperor, I will lead us to new heights never breached by my father and our ancestors. I will expand our empire outside the great mother world and establish us as the sole dominating force in the galaxy. Everything will be at our fingertips. It is only a matter of time. To attain this dream, my first act as emperor is to deal with the issue of the Varsan threat. Their eradication and expulsion will spark a new age of prosperity for our people. I will not follow the footsteps of my father, as it had led him to a gruesome death and failed legacy, where the Varson were allowed to tear us apart from within. No more shall this occur. Today I am proclaiming the start of a new age, the Zenturian age. Hail Zentur.
The next day, Bajirus Zentur was crowned emperor of the Zenturian Empire and god king of the planet of Zentar. His first decree as emperor was to reform the government by executing all those with friendly relationships and ties with the Varson. The month-long purge claimed the lives of thousands of government officials who were labeled by Bajirus to be traitors of the state who were executed due to the act of treason. The emperor replaced those executed with Proxima Zenturi youth he brainwashed under his rule in his province the past few decades. These new officials swore loyalty not only to the empire, but an undying servitude to Bajirus. With these changes in the establishment, the government began to take steps in reducing the influence and power the Varson alliance had on Zentar. Bajirus wrote a declaration that made it illegal for Varson cities to mine on the planet, placed high tariffs on all Varson ships entering and leaving the planet, prohibited Varson military ships, including the Surrogate, from orbiting Zentar, and made it illegal for citizens of the Zenturian Empire to breed or have sexual relationships with those in the Varson alliance, with the penalty of public execution. Thus began the rule of an unprecedented tyrant in the Zenturian system. An individual with near limitless ambitions and who will stop for nothing in growing more powerful, influential until he reaches the status equivalent in being god of the galaxy. In the year 46Z, 6 years since Bajirus took the Zenturian throne, there would be yet another major development in the Varson alliance that rose to prominence. In the 30s, when the Varson began mining and resource harvesting campaigns on their colony planet of Yavis, they encountered a race living in seclusion from all other life forms. Hidden in the deep ice caves on the piercing cold planet, the Varson discovered a fox-like species. The Varson did not end up announcing the news of this discovery until 16 years later in 46Z, and by then this newly discovered species was fully incorporated as equal citizens in the Varson alliance and was spread throughout their territory the past decade. This incorporation of an entirely new species into the Empire as equal citizens nearly doubled their population. This was a great achievement of the Varson, who continued to progress as a galactic contender to Zenturian dominance in the known galaxy. Upon the release of this news, Bajirus took swift action in declaring all populations of the Varson alliance living on the planet Zentar to be hunted down and driven off the planet with any methods available. Chapter 9, Zentar Expulsion Incident. In the year 46E, in contrast to the stagnant growth occurring in the Zenturian Empire, the emerging Varson threat continued to worsen. Emperor Bajirus ordered an invasion of all territories owned by the Varson alliance on Zentar. This act shocked the galactic community, as there has not been a conflict in over 40 years. The unprecedented invasion violated the previously established boundaries set by generous Emperor Galactic Zentur, which had previously allowed the Varson alliance to live on Zentar with the Zenturians. Bajirus' agenda consisted of backtracking on the previous actions taken by his father in the past, which he viewed as regressive to the Zenturian people and their empire. In doing so, he aimed to quell the emerging force of the Varson alliance. He believed that if this progressive civilization were to be unchecked in their swelling, they would eventually surpass the might of the Zenturian Empire. Bajirus claims the endangerment of all living species if Varson dominance were to overtake the Zenturians. This belief stems from his thought process, in which the Varson are the primary obstacle in his way to becoming the god of the galaxy. With the act of prohibition on Varson vessels orbiting the planet and forcing them to demilitarize their Zentar colonial region, the Zenturian forces held a great advantage in the outbreak of the conflict. Zenturian soldiers followed closely behind rows of tanks and armored vehicles supported by aircraft and spacecraft bombardments from above. The outlying cities in the Varson region of Zentar were occupied and used as staging grounds for aircraft to relentlessly bombard the inner population centers of cities the Zenturian forces advanced on. The air and spacecraft of the Zenturian military were ordered to indiscriminately strike densely populated areas of these Varson cities, thus leveling whole neighborhoods and blocks of the city with every passing minute, killing millions upon millions of civilians. All that remained to stand against the oncoming wave of Zenturian troops were the regional police and local garrison, the only armed personnel permitted by the new emperor to be stationed in the Varson Zentar region. These weak local forces were quickly overwhelmed by the organized and fully militarized Zenturian offensive. All those taken captive that resisted the invasion were executed. News of the undeclared war was relayed to the capital of the Varson alliance on Neptune. Following the receival of this news, the Varson government released a statement officially declaring war in response to the unwarranted invasion. The Varson alliance were building up their military and space fleet in preparation for potential future conflicts. They hastily navigated their local Zenturian system fleet stationed on Glarvis to blockade Zentar, led by Admiral Josiah Wilson on the Surrogate flagship. The ship monitored the situation from above and could see the Zenturian ships in low orbit of the planet striking their cities. The Varson fleet was instructed by Josiah to engage the Zenturian ships to disrupt their blockade of the planet. A fraction of Josiah's fleet split off to intercept the orbital bombardment vessels of the Zenturian Empire. Shortly thereafter, they were intercepted by focused laser fire from below on Zentar's surface, the earlier installed Zentar-to-orbit artillery. The artillery ripped through the leading cruiser in the break-off force. The Zenturian ships previously bombarding Varsan populations on Zentar swiftly maneuvered toward the Varsan cruiser's explosion and intercepted the oncoming break-off fleet headed towards their position. The ships were evenly matched and were tied up in a bloody battle in the lower orbit of the planet. In concert with the break-off fleet's battle, the surrogate began advancing alone towards the urban zone of Zentar, where the Zenturian Empire had most of its cities densely packed together in an exceedingly populated region. Upon observing the Zenturian ships bombarding Varsan cities earlier in the engagement, Josiah decided to hit them back in an act of revenge on a far more destructive scale. The surrogate initiated relentless bombardment of the Zenturian urban districts, wiping out entire communities with every strike. Josiah was ordered to stand down by the Varsan Command Center headquartered on Neptune via interstellar communications, but his blind rage impelled him to mute all incoming communications alongside intensifying his bombardments. In response to the arrival of the surrogate and its accompanying fleet in the orbit of Zentar, Emperor Vajirus released a transmission calling upon the other civilizations in the Zenturian system to press sanctions against the Varsan Alliance for entering the orbit of the planet. The surrogate fleet were claimed to be an illegal action in orbit, breaking previously agreed upon treaties. The uninvolved civilizations were hesitant at first. Eventually all but one civilization, the Topians, ended up cutting trade and diplomatic ties with the Varsan, as they feared getting on the wrong side of the Zenturian Empire would result in hostilities with the Empire in the future. The Varsan fleet's break-off force remained engaged in battle with the Zenturian bombardment ships and ended up receiving heavy damages to their hulls from the artillery batteries on the planet's surface. The Varsan ships fell into the Zenturian trap. With the ships tied down in a costly and prolonged battle, their mobility was cut down to near nothing. With no chance to disengage and reform their positions, these ships were essentially locked in place as sitting ducks. By the time the Zenturian artillery was locked, ready, and engaged, they opened fire into the opposing space fleet, finishing them off. Not one Varsan ship made it out of the skirmish. Matters would only begin to worsen. The surrogate retained their silencing of their communication systems off by order of Commander Josiah Wilson. The news of the defeated break-off fleet and changing tide never reached them. The Zenturian orbital bombardment force that were left over from the engagement moved in to attack the unprepared Varsan flagship from behind. With this ambush, Josiah fell into panic with the isolated position he put himself in and unmuted his communication systems. What awaited him on the other line was hundreds of people screaming chaotically. Josiah began to sweat profusely and admitted to his men that Zentar was a lost cause, and so was the battle. The only viable option was to escape while they could with what little they had left of their fleet and rebuild. Although the surrogate received minor damages from the planet-based artillery and orbital strike force, the ship managed to break through and withdraw to the planet Glarvis. The Varsan ended up reaching a deal with the Zenturian Emperor to end the conflict in the same year it began, 46D, as carrying it on will only result in more unnecessary casualties. Peace had now returned to the galaxy, but for how long? Both sides seemed to only reach this armistice as they were both quite unprepared for a fully mobilized conflict against one another. The Zenturian Empire obtained its objective in securing their home world for themselves and unifying the planet under one banner. Meanwhile, the Varsan benefited from the peace, as it gave them further time to train their undisciplined commanders. The armistice was a chance to mobilize and build up their forces. The Varsan alliance now held great hostility towards the Zenturians, as this was a great unexpected betrayal. The Varsan leadership was completely taken off guard and unprepared. If there were ever to be a conflict in the future, it would be the Varsan who reigned victorious over Emperor Vajirus and his regime. The population of the Varsan region on Zentar that survived the invasion were enslaved and put on sale in the international marketplace. The Royalist Union, Judarian Republic, and Balian hegemony continued their cut of ties following the conflict to better relations between their civilizations with the Zenturian Empire that emerged victorious in the conflict. The Varsan alliance greatly admired the Topians staying uninvolved from the conflict in comparison to all the other civilizations that jumped on the bandwagon in supporting the Zenturian invasion. The Topians moved forward with developing better trade and diplomatic relations with the Varsan alliance. Vajirus celebrated the great victory by hosting colossal parties and events at his palace alongside various military parades in city streets to honor those who served in the operation. The victory over what was supposed to be the Zenturian Empire's contender in galactic power ended up being a cakewalk. This decisive triumph for Vajirus was the equivalent of taking a bump of cocaine and then chugging 3 energy drinks. His heart was pumping and his whole being was fueled by the victory, expanding his visions and targets even greater than before imagined. Vajirus believed he was unstoppable before the war. This victory further amplified these beliefs and drove the new emperor to even greater heights of influence and legitimacy in the eyes of not only his people, but the civilizations looking to now align with him. He knew at the beginning of the conflict that the Varsan fleet power would be a major obstacle, but his military's mobility and strategical planning overcame the more powerful foe. The Zenturian fleet is now continuously updated and expanded as the Emperor looks on to new horizons. Vajirus closed every parade and party speech with the following statement that lays out his future plans and ambitions he aims to achieve with his legacy as Emperor.
It is time to leave this planet that has limited our influence among the stars and expand outward to show this galaxy how superior we are and what we are capable of. Our destiny will no longer be bound to a single planet from this date forth. This isn't just about planetary domination, nor system domination, but galactic domination. If I don't manage to conquer the galaxy, I will ensure my children do. Hail Zentur and praise me as I stand here today.
Chapter 10, Galactic Diplomacy. Once again, there is peace in the galaxy. But is this peace just a facade? How long will it last this time? With tensions mounting between the power-hungry Zenturian Empire and the vengeful Varsan Alliance, it seems that the end of this peace is just on the horizon. This tense atmosphere was observed closely by all the other civilizations who eventually chose sides to align with. The Balian Hegemony, Judarian Republic, and Royalist Union entered military alliances with the Zenturian Empire on 47Z, and the Topians entered a defensive pact with the Varsan Alliance. With this move, the Topians isolated themselves not only from most of the other civilizations in the Zenturian system, but from the Royalist Union of whom they shared a planet with. This alignment with the Varsan Alliance made the Topians' military increase in power considerably, as the Varsans' industry supplied them with new ships for their fleet and new advanced firearms for their ground troops. This move frustrated the Royalist Union, who felt that this militarization threatened the peace on the planet. In response, the Union began pushing out propaganda against the Topians, claiming that they were building up their military to push them off the planet. The Union labeled them as an aggressive species who is undeserving to live on such a beautiful planet. Neu Erde became the new diplomatic battlefield in this peaceful era and was used as a proxy for the Varsan and Zenturian powers to flex their muscle. When news spread to Zentar about the Varsan arming and supplying the Topians on the planet, they began to respond by sending generals to run military exercises with the Royalist Union alongside supplying tanks and new spaceships for the Union. The buildup of both sides would continue into 48Z, where rising tensions continued to worsen between both sides. Borders were shut between the nations, propaganda escalated so much to call for the complete extermination of the other civilization species, military drills were carried out along the borderline, and resources were continuously funneled in from the Zenturian and Varsan civilizations. The region became a powder keg ready to blow at any moment. All it needed was a spark. The Balian Hegemony and Judarian Republic built up their space fleets in response to the mounting tensions on Neu Erde, as they believed a conflict was imminent. The two civilizations continued to trade technology and resources with Zentar and maintained strong relations with Emperor Vajirus to retain their alliances. The Judarian Republic, fearing the fate Neu Erde and the Topians, who they believed would be wiped out if a war were to take place, invested in longer warp drives capable of traveling to more distant star systems. The Republic secretly harbored around 1 billion of the Topian population on Fluna. This had to be done in secret, as this action would draw attention from both the Zenturian Empire and Varsan Alliance, who would end up bringing the system's only democratic state into the limelight of the upcoming conflict. The conservationist and pacifist ideals that dominate the Judarian Republic's government pushes them to get involved in areas that other nations would typically avoid, one thing being the protection of other species from extinction. Their alliance with the Zenturian Empire was only for protection and was the best option to keep their civilization alive moving forward. In contrast to the Judarian-Zenturian alliance, the Balian Hegemony had a devout loyalty and respect for those of the Zenturian race and civilization. They strive to be as powerful as them, but they understand their limitations. The Balians are content with being weaker than those on the mother planet and respect the natural hierarchy of power. Today they only aim to be the best ally that they possibly can without getting in the way of Zenturian expansion and power. They seek to assist Vajirus in his ambitious plans and align their values with the Emperor's. The Varsan Alliance has an extreme distaste towards those of the Zenturian Empire for obvious reasons, and they see the Balians as no different. They view the Balians and Judarians as weak civilizations who merely play the role as puppets to Emperor Vajirus. Propaganda quickly spreads around, disowning the legitimacy of the two nations in Varsan street gossip. The Varsan-Zenturian rivalry is brewing not only division, but what seems to be the early stages for a war at a galactic scale, a galactic war. A war that would reach a scale of destruction, bringing misery to various worlds, people, and civilizations across the known galaxy, one that would stand the test of time and cement relations between the populations. Ever since man first ventured out of his mother planet, there has been a domino effect, one domino falling on the other, leading to more death and more misery. What will be the next domino to fall? Chapter 11, The Powder Keg Ignites. Neu Erde, a beautiful planet that can be seen from the eyes of those on Zentar, a planet filled with bountiful resources. Through its thick forests, great open plains, high mountains, and vast oceans littered with thousands of islands. A planet resembling the human homeworld of Earth, a beautiful marble painted with bright shades of green and blue. A planet now divided between two civilizations, the last pure human civilization, the Royalist Union, and the native civilization to the planet living amongst its warmer climates in the jungles, the Topians. This world has been slowly degrading in its beauty since the arrival of humans. Natural resources have been extracted at an unsustainable scale, and the Topians have been resenting the arrival of the Royalist Union ever since the Zenturian leadership gave them colonization rights to their beautiful homeworld without their consent. Tensions began to tower on this planet decades ago and have mounted to extreme levels ever since. The year is now 48C, nearly 50 years since the arrival of the new civilizations and the human species, and it looks as though nothing but disorder was brought to the Zenturian system. Ongoing propaganda efforts by the Topians and Royalist Union against one another continued to worsen until a group calling themselves the Black Hand would stage a plot to assassinate the sitting heir to the throne of the Royalist Union. Today, the Royalist Union is led by King Myler Kohler II. The king just celebrated his 50th birthday last month and has only one legitimate male heir to take his throne, that being his son, Myler Kohler III. One day a military parade was being held in the capital of the Royalist Union in Neu-Berlin with the prince soon to be next leader of the Union at the head of the parade. He rode an old Earth-style automobile with an open top and waved to the thousands of bystanders as they drove by and leading the parade. That was until darkness would overrun the event, a darkness that would shroud not only the Union, but the planet of Neu-Erde and the whole of the galaxy. The height of these tensions led to a rise of crime on the planet in the Royalist Union. As its history had shown over centuries ago, the Union had a historically unstable past. The division that existed on Earth in the old European-led nation persisted today on the planet of Neu-Erde. Where there was one form of government ruling the nation, there were hundreds of organizations that aimed for its downfall. These organizations were too weak to stand up to the Royalist Union's monarchy and had been suppressed for decades now. Coups and revolutions seemed like a thing of the past as the government was too powerful and its capabilities far surpassed those of past governments in history in respect to its people. This led to these opposition groups to engage in criminal empires that avoided direct confrontation with the monarchy. Instead, they brought capital and resources to the group while weakening the Union's legitimacy and stability from the inside behind the curtain. This criminal activity persisted for decades behind the scenes of everyday life. One day it would propel itself into changing the course of history. The criminal organization, the Black Hand, rose to prominence in the past 5 years in support of toppling the corrupt monarchy and replacing it with a democratically elected government instituting a republic. The Topians paid close attention to the activity of these organizations, funneling them money, weapons, and instructions of what to sabotage, who to deal with, and what inside information they had on the Royalist Union government. The Black Hand was by far the most extreme of the organizations, calling for the removal of the Union from the home world of the Topians, who they felt they were unrightfully violating by harvesting and populating their planet, showing no respect for the natives. They directed blame on the sitting government of the monarchy and advocated for the rights of the Topians, which gained them the respect and loyalty of the Topian civilization. The activity of the Black Hand would reach its climax in the parade taking place in Neu-Berlin in 48C as the organization opened fire using Topian-supplied firearms on the vehicle carrying the heir to the throne. Assassinating the prince and killing all those in the vehicle led to an uproar of civil unrest and anarchy on the city streets. History always repeats itself when humans are involved. Just as Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot and killed leading to the start of the First World War in 1914, the assassination of Myler Kohler III would spark its own conflict. This assassination by the criminal organization supported and funded by the Topians acted as a lit match dropping into the open hole at the top of a barrel. What followed was an explosion. Fires ripped through the tropical forests of the Topian lands as the Royalist Air Force firebombed the lush terrain. The fires spread toward the cities, alerting the Topians that they were under attack. The anti-air guns in the cities began to unload into the skies, shooting down many of the oncoming bomber planes, marking the first casualties of the conflict. Along the borders where both militaries patrolled and exercised on a regular basis, exploded into thousands of chaotic skirmishes. Laser, missile, and gunfire erupted on both sides of the border. Confusion and hysteria spread across the ranks as news slowly made its way out to those fighting of why this all began. In the following hours, sitting King Myler Kohler II of the Royalist Union gave an address to his people stating,
"Today a peaceful parade hosting my son at its mast was interrupted by degenerate criminals of the Black Hand who were supplied with firearms from the Topians. These firearms murdered my son. Today is a dark day in our history. I had stated ever since our arrival that these foul beasts we find ourselves sharing a planet with should no longer exist. These Topians should be eradicated from the face of Neu-Erde. What they did was unforgivable. My son, my only heir to the throne, is dead. The blood is on the hands of these swine. Today marks the beginning of our great Inquisition. An inquisition to rid this planet of these disgusting, vulgar, and inferior creatures. Today the Royalist Union officially declares war on the Topian civilization, with the goal of eradicating their disgusting species.
This declaration of war by the Royalist Union on the Topians was broadcasted throughout the whole of the Zenturian system's communication network and informed all civilizations of the outbreak of the conflict. The previously mentioned defensive pact of the Varsan alliance triggers as the Topians are under threat of invasion from the Royalist Union. The Varsan quickly find themselves pulled into the conflict, declaring war on the Royalist Union and begin to move the fleet in to engage the advancing forces of the Union. At first, the Zenturian Empire hesitates as they believe they are not fully prepared for another conflict where the Varsan have been ready for quite some time, but they have no other choice once the Union calls them to arms. The Zenturian Empire joins the war on the side of the Royalist Union, honoring their alliance, and they call in their allies, the Judarian Republic and the Balian hegemony, to assist them in this offensive war. With the news of the Zenturian Empire joining in a couple of hours following the Varsan decision to intervene, they began to scramble with their fleet and redirected from Noierda towards the planet of Zentar. Bloody fighting in the jungles continues throughout Noierda between both the Royalist Union and Topians, and a space battle rages in its orbit between the two forces with no decisive winner in the present, with neither side having competitive leverage over the other. Meanwhile, the surrogate accompanied by a large Varsan fleet made its way towards Zentar to keep in check their primary threat, the Zenturian Empire. A battle erupts with the Varsan fleet engaging with surface-to-orbit artillery and cities on Zentar. The Zenturian fleet enters the planet's orbit to engage the oncoming hostile fleet, but finds itself greatly outnumbered and outgunned. It engages the ships encasing the surrogate, but is unable to make a decisive breakthrough to disrupt the flagship's bombardment of Zentar's surface. The battle leaned in the Varsan fleet's favor, with the cities on Zentar under constant bombardment, and there was little the Zenturian fleet could do in an effective manner to stop them. As the fighting between the two rivals raged on in the orbit of Zentar, the Judarian fleet arrived to assist the Zenturian fleet in protecting Zentar. The fleet charged straight toward the Varsan flagship and halted its orbital bombardment. With the bombardment halted, the ship was now tied up in battling the whole of the Judarian fleet. Although lacking in strength, the fleet accomplished its aim to disrupt the Varsan offensive. The Balian hegemony moved their fleet to strike the planet of Glarvis. As they entered the orbit of the planet, there was a small garrison fleet that intercepted the oncoming invaders, but was quickly overwhelmed. The Balian fleet broke through and caused the Glarvis garrison fleet to withdraw, thereby allowing the bombardment of the planet to begin. Violent missile strikes rained down on the cities of the undefended planet, and little to no opposition to the Balians was put forward. Chapter 12, Battle of Zentar. The Varsan forces caught the Zenturian Empire off guard, instantly warping their fleet into the orbit of Zentar and bombarding the unprepared Zenturian population. The Varsan tied up the Zenturian orbit garrison fleets with 4 of their supporting fleets, while their flagship fleet led by the surrogate bombarded Zentar's urban zone. The Zenturian forces tied up in the battle numbered 6,000 against the 8,000 Varsan they were currently engaged in battle. The surrogate's fleet was the largest the galaxy has ever seen in its history, with 8,000 spaceships in one formation alone. There was a Zenturian fleet inbound coming from the north side of the planet, which numbered 4,000 strong, and in the far southern orbit of the planet 3,000 Judarian spaceships came in to reinforce the Zentar garrison. Totals at the start of the battle were 10,000 Zenturian ships supported by 3,000 Judarian ships versus the 16,000-strong Varsan fleets. With the reinforcements running late, the battle was in decisive favor for the Varsan alliance. The Battle of Zentar escalated the longer it dragged on. The Varsan alliance dominated the start of the battle with unrestrained bombardments of Zenturian cities and the Zenturian fleet unable to reach the surrogate flagship fleet. The battle already seemed to be a lost cause. The bombardment tactics of the Varsan fleet were disrupted with the arrival of Judarian forces that bypassed the Varsan Zenturian engagements, which kept each other tied up in intense firefights and were able to come in direct combat with the surrogate. Once the Varsan flagship fleet fell under enemy fire, they had to reform their positions with cutting off the bombardment of Zentar, which they were prioritizing earlier. The flagship fleet turned its focus on the pest fleet of the Judarian Republic and began opening fire on its ships. This move allowed the Zenturian fleets on the ground to prepare for launch and assembly as the bombardment came to a halt. The forces on the ground were rushing onto their ships as the garrison fleet was barely holding out. Alongside this, the Zenturian Northern Garrison Fleet finally arrived in the battle, hitting the left flank of the Varsan positions. The left flank of the Varsan fleet, 4,000 ships, was now in combat with 6,000 spaceships of the Zenturian Garrison Fleet. The Varsan flagship fleet, 8,000 ships, was battling the Judarian forces, 3,000 ships, and was tearing apart the small inferior fleets, while the right flank of the Varsan forces, 4,000 ships, was in a stalemate against the equally strong Zenturian garrison fleets, 4,000 ships. The Judarian forces began to capitulate under the might of the Varsan center, losing 3 fleets and around 2,000 ships. Meanwhile, the Varsan fleet only suffered around 250 ship casualties. In response to this unwinnable engagement, Judarian forces began to withdraw from the battle, followed in pursuit by the Varsan fleet. The Varsan left flank began to break under the pressure of the slightly greater forces of the Zenturian garrison after the reinforcing northern garrison joined the battle. One fleet was annihilated while the others suffered around 1,000 spaceship casualties, half of its strength. Meanwhile, the garrison forces suffered 2,500 spaceship casualties and the destruction of 2 of their fleets, most of which were destroyed before the northern garrison arrived. The right flank of the Varsan forces held their positions and destroyed around 2,500 Zenturian ships and 2 fleets while suffering around 750 spaceship casualties themselves. With the left flank in the favor of the Zenturian forces, the center breaking into disorder, and the right flank dominated by the Varsan, the battle's outcome was still uncertain at this point. With the opening in the Varsan center following the pursuit of the Judarian forces, the Zenturian Empire dispatched 3 more fleets totaling 6,000 more ships into the planet's orbit. The remaining Varsan fleet on the left flank was destroyed, the Judarian forces were wiped out by the pursuing Varsan flagship fleet, and the Zenturian right flank garrison was wiped out. The 3 new fleets along with what remained of the Zenturian orbit garrison engaged the returning flagship fleet and the 2 Varsan fleets from the right flank. Following the destruction of multiple space fleets on both sides, the Zenturian side now has 10,500 ships fighting against the Varsan's remaining 11,200 ships. The near encirclement of their flagship fleet led to the repositioning of the Varsan fleets, with the flagship fleet pulling away from the front lines and the 2 supporting Varsan fleets taking on the bulk of the Zenturian force. When the surrogate-led fleet broke away from the front lines, it dropped massive nuclear bombs that had the capability of digging into the mantle of a planet before exploding. Once the bombs ignited in the mantle of the planet, everything in the region evaporated into dust. Cities, shipyards, military bases, mines, anything and everything in the area was wiped off the face of the planet. What followed was massive shock waves causing earthquakes across Centaur, greatly damaging cities across the world. Billions would ultimately lose their lives in this devastating blast, and the planet would now forever be scarred with a crater. Its mantle exposed to the darkness of space as if it were a beauty mark on one's face. After bombing Centaur, the Varsan flagship fleet withdrew from the battle, leaving the other 2 Varsan fleets behind to be captured by Zenturian forces. The Battle of Centaur was the bloodiest battle in galactic history to date, and the losses on both sides were devastating. The entirety of the Judarian forces that came in as reinforcements to the Battle of Centaur were wiped out. The 5 small fleets contained a total of 3,000 spaceships, which were all destroyed by the Varsan flagship fleet. The Judarian casualties in the Battle of Centaur are estimated to be 30 million, with an average of around 10,000 military personnel per ship. But the Judarians would take the lightest losses in the battle as they brought the smallest number of spaceships and troops. The Zenturian Empire suffered the loss of 8 garrison fleets and a total of 9,500 spaceships, meaning that nearly 95 million military personnel on ships lost their lives defending their home planet in its orbit. But, despite the number of lives lost in the space battle above Centaur, the loss of life on the surface of Centaur was far worse, totaling around 8 billion. Civilians and soldiers alike perished through the various bombings, explosions, and shockwaves from the nuclear blasts by the Varsan Alliance's surrogate fleet. Luckily enough, the primary target of the bombings, Emperor Vagirus and his immediate family, managed to avoid losing their lives in the bombardment campaign. The Varsan Alliance, originally commanding a force of 16,000 ships through 5 fleets, they had 7,000 ships destroyed, with a loss of life being 70 million. The 2 remaining fleets, consisting of around 1,200 ships that surrendered, led to the enslavement of nearly 12 million Varsan military personnel. Although the Varsan casualties were not as severe as the Zenturian Empire, they were still at a disadvantage compared to the much more populous empire and its various allies. This was the primary reason why the Varsan forces took extreme measures to eliminate as many Zenturian and Judarian forces as possible in this bloody battle. In the end, a Varsan flagship fleet was the only surviving Varsan fleet to escape the battle. The conclusion of the Battle of Centaur resulted in neither side being a true victor. The Varsan Alliance did not do as much damage as they set out to do, and the Zenturian Empire may have successfully driven away the invading forces, but an extreme loss of life. This battle is not the end of this conflict, but marks the beginning of the devastation that is to unfold. Emperor Vagirus is an unforgiving individual, and the actions taken by the Varsan will contribute evermore towards his hatred and thirst for galactic domination. This Pyrrhic victory will not go unnoticed as the Emperor begins to plot his revenge. Chapter 13, Battle of Neu Erda. At the time the Battle of Centaur occurred, the Battle of Neu Erda had been ongoing for days. Neu Erda fulfilled its role as the powder keg that ignited and brought all the spacefaring civilizations into a galactic war. The battle for the planet has been back and forth, with no decisive victor coming on top from either side. With no major breakthroughs, both civilizations seem to continuously bleed into one another. The Royalist Union and the Topians are 2 of the most insignificant and weak civilizations in the galaxy, but both have the objective of fully controlling Neu Erda. So long as the planet is shared, there will never be peace. While the skirmishes and disorganized fighting continued, all along the front lines of the 2 civilizations an offensive was planned in secret by the Topians. This offensive was codenamed Operation Centerstorm. Operation Centerstorm aimed to push in a wedge-like formation through the center lines of the Royalist forces, splitting their front line in two. When the operation began, the Topians advanced their formations, which continued fighting in the swampy and tropical wetlands between the two nations and used their native knowledge of the tides to their advantage. When summer of 48Z arrived, they knew that the tides would be at their highest point, forcing the Royalist forces to reform their positions. On the day the tides began to rise and push back the Royalist forces, the Topians advanced in an intense mobilized advance, thus finally achieving a breakthrough in the region, enveloping multiple Royalist units caught off guard by the weather changes. The Topian advance consisted of around 80 million troops versus the Royalist Union Center formation that consisted of around 50 million. The encircled pockets of Royalist forces were crushed, forcing the units to surrender or fight to the death against overwhelming Topian troops who now held a superior position. The breakthrough led to around 5 million Topian casualties and 32 million Royalist casualties, with another 5 million captured. Completely overwhelmed and unprepared for this Topian offensive, the Royalist Union retreated from the tropical and wetter climates along their border. They saw the Topians held a severe advantage over their troops there. The lines were now reformed around the drier and more urban areas of the Royalist territory. Although the Topians made that significant advance into the Union, they became bogged down yet again in the plains region where trench warfare dominated the landscape. No change to the front lines would occur into the fall. The arrival of winter in 48Z gave the European stock Royalist Union an advantage where there were successful offensives that pushed back the Topians past the previously overrun front lines and into Topian territory. The wetlands and tropical areas have frozen over, and the Royalist Union marched their forces across the icy landscape with little opposition. Following the Battle of Zentar, there were Royalist allied forces that were freed up to assist in the space battles orbiting Neu Erde. The Topian fleet was now engaged by the four civilizations and was forced to retreat, warping out of the Zenturian system to the solar system, where the surrogate fleet also withdrew toward after the Battle of Zentar. Following the withdrawal of the Topian fleets, those remaining on the planet that did not retreat in time were forced to surrender in the beginning of 49Z. 2 billion Topians were executed by the Royalist Union in a manufactured genocide that continued throughout the entirety of the year, and another 5 billion were sold into the slave trade. Around 3 billion of those were bought by the Judarian Republic, who plotted to preserve the race in secret and free them by sending them off on a new journey to other systems. The total number of Topians that escaped the conflict when the tide was no longer in their favor numbered around 15 billion through various colony and military ships that fled Neu Erde. These Topians and their governing body made it out alive and were currently stationed on the planet Neptune under the protection of the Varsan Alliance. The invasion of the Topian territory resulted in the unification of Neu Erde under the sole banner of the Royalist Union and marked another victory for the Zenturian-led alliance. The Varsan were on their way back from the solar system to defend their planets Glarvis and Yavis from the oncoming threat of Zenturian invasion. They believed that being pushed out of the system would result in the ambitious and vengeful empire rolling over all their territory as though it were a bulldozer. The Varsan Alliance believed it was the only force standing in the way of a Zenturian-led galaxy, and they would not rest until this threat was dealt with and neutralized. Even before the fall of Neu Erde to the Royalist Union, the Varsan Alliance entered an economic state of total war. All production and consumer factories were turned into wartime production centers, all men were forced to serve in the armed forces until the conflict were to end, and all women were mandated to have a minimum of 5 kids per household to prop up the population of the far less populated civilization compared to their Zenturian rival. Chapter 14. March of the Zenturian Armada. The year is now 50Z. The events involving the Zenturian Empire and their allies in the years prior launched Vagiris deep in thought. Although the battles of Zentar and Neu Erde were victories, the loss of life on Zentar was apocalyptic. Although the planet still maintained an absurdly large population, the blast that immediately killed 8 billion in one of its most populated urban and industrial districts was a massive blow to the Empire's morale. Vagiris, whose main goal was to drive the Varsan Alliance out of the Zenturian system to grow his empire without obstacles, turned from an optimistic and empire-building stance to a greatly irritated and vengeful stance. Vagiris sat down with the leader of the Royalist Union, King Mylar Kolar II, whose son was assassinated in 48C, the event that sparked this conflict. The status of the conflict has simmered down as both sides remained quiet and have not advanced into one another's territory since the victory over Neu Erde. The galaxy was at war with every nation involved, but it was the quietest it had been in a while. Remember that it is always calmest before a storm.
My good friend, Miller. How are you holding up since these past events? I must congratulate you on unifying New Erde under your banner. That achievement and your son's life will not go in vain. I guarantee it.
Today my people continue capturing those inferior reptiles on our world and proceed to sell them into slavery. The acts taken against not only my family, but the Royalist Union as a whole, by the Topian people is unforgivable. They shall feel the nihilism and hopelessness I felt when I lost my son. So may I ask why you brought me here on Zenta today?
Know that I respect those of which I talk with in person the most above all others. If we only communicate over digital systems, that correlates to one being disposable to me, whether they be those I consider friends or family. Today we will discuss the plans I have for this conflict, a plan that would put your nation and its people in the spotlight. A plan not only to win this war against the Varsan threat, but to give you an opportunity for revenge. You see, this is no longer a conflict over the planet New Erd, nor is our sole objective to secure the Zenturian system only for our allies, but rather to extinguish the Varsan alliance. The Varsan act as though they have no boundaries or restrictions, as if they are a fire that is burning bright in the night on a dry grass basin, spreading in all directions at rapid and uncontainable speeds. We will act as a helicopter by avoiding directly rushing into the
What do you mean by this? What is this plan of revenge you speak of?
You will soon find out. The fight will be brought to their territory. With loss being so great on our side throughout this past year, I believe it is about time we return the favor. It would only be fair.
Following their meeting, the Zenturian Empire and Royalist Union prepared an offensive that would take the battle to the heart of the Varsan Alliance, the solar system. The system that gave birth to humanity is controlled entirely by the Varsan Alliance, with the planets of Earth and Neptune holding billions of people and with space stations housing billions more. Their plan included the Zenturian Republic to maintain a blockade over the planet Glarvis in the Zenturian system, the Royalist Union to advance and strike Earth, which was rumored to be housing millions of Topian refugees, while the Zenturian Empire and Balian hegemony would engage the forces on the planet Neptune with the goal of destroying the Varsan fleet's main shipyard. In doing this, the Gyrus Alliance would gain dominance over the whole of the galactic community and would then be able to establish their own order over the galaxy. In late spring of 50Z, the plan was put into motion. The blockade over Glarvis met little to no resistance and was maintained for the sole reason to not let any ships leave the planet. The Zenturian fleet joined by the Balians set their course for Neptune, and the Royalist Union set their own course to arrive just outside the orbit of Earth's moon. The Zenturian fleet en route to the solar system was commanded by a Proxima Centauri, who was a former pure-blooded human and explorer, Vesuvius Exodus. The commander at this point had been fully integrated into the Zenturian nobility on Zentar and had a large family. He would bring glory to his family and empire once more before officially retiring. The elder was now at the age of 98, but with the Zenturian blood mixed with his own, he is expected to live up to 110 years old, all while still having a healthy build. It is common for those with Zenturian blood and organs to maintain the same appearance they have in their early 20s and youth, so this was not uncommon. Bagyrus is great friends with Vesuvius. He admires his patriotic sentiments and achievements that have brought great victories for the empire. He accepts Vesuvius' request to lead the advance and puts great trust into him to succeed. Bagyrus is confident his plan will succeed, as Vesuvius was a native to the solar system and had his fair share of decisive victories there 50 years ago. Chapter 15, Battle of Neptune. Upon their arrival in the solar system, Vesuvius' fleet were immediately ambushed by the Varsan fleet garrisoned in Neptune's orbit. The battle escalated as the Balian fleet arrived a brief time later in the planet's orbit, and once the Zenturian fleet organized themselves, they effectively forced back the ambushing Varsan ships with their overwhelming firepower. The ambush was meant to scare away the oncoming fleets, not to decimate them, so once the reinforcements came in, the battle lines stabilized. At the beginning of the battle, the Zenturian fleet consisted of one flagship fleet containing Commander Vesuvius, 10,000 ships, along with 7 standard-class fleets, 2,000 ships per fleet, 4 of which were brought by the Balian hegemony, and 10 minor-class fleets, 1,000 ships per fleet. The Varsan had 5 strike fleets, 500 ships per fleet, that ambushed the Zenturian forces at the start of the battle. The Varsan also have a flagship fleet led by Josiah Wilson, 8,000 ships, 5 minor-class fleets, 1,000 ships per fleet, and 3 standard-class fleets, 2,000 ships per fleet. Josiah was in command from the infamous surrogate flagship. Alongside their military, the Varsan had a nearby space station shipyard orbiting Neptune. The station is home to 3 billion people. The Varsan were eclipsed by the Zenturian invaders' numbers at the start of the battle. This motivated the defenders to set up the ambush, trying to disrupt the Zenturian positions. The Varsan ambush was quickly neutralized. All 5 strike fleets were destroyed while only dealing with 1 minor-class Zenturian fleet. This failed ambush by Josiah sacrificed 2,500 ships to destroy 1,000. In a battle centered around numbers, this was a poor decision for the start of the battle. The remaining 17,000 Varsan ships would now have to withstand the might of the remaining 33,000-strong invading fleet. With the knowledge that his overwhelming numbers gave him a superior advantage along with the disorderly formation of his opponent's forces, Vesuvius ordered an all-out advance of the Balian and Zenturian forces to engage the Varsan L front simultaneously. The only way he could envision defeat is if his forces were split up and targeted by the enemy grouping together. To avoid this, he aimed to keep all the opposing fleets tied up in battle so that they were unable to rendezvous. Vesuvius believed his advance would quickly overwhelm the enemy lines and would expect them to be in panic mode now, but that could not have been further from the case. As the commander of the Varsan forces, Josiah Wilson remained calm and collected on his ship. He was a man who understood that panic would do nothing but worsen his already dire situation. Along with his relaxed composure during the battle, even though his fleets were being torn apart and surrounded, he kept an ace hidden up his sleeve. Josiah was no longer a fool. His arrogance in the past lost millions of lives, and a humiliating defeat in the Zentar expulsion conflict. Today he aims to redeem himself. His plan was to lure in the enemy, who are greater in number and power, deep into his positions and tie them up for as long as possible. While the battle transpired, he knew that he would be sacrificing many fleets and ships who would inevitably be encircled by the enemy charge, but he ordered his men to hold steadfast. As his minor-class fleets were all destroyed outside of Station Erica, the space station orbiting Neptune, he gave the order to turn the tide of this battle. Josiah knew from personal experience that a fleet was nothing without a commander, so by removing the key player from the table he could shut the game board and move on with his life. The opening that formed following the breakthrough outside of Station Erica was immediately filled with a blinding beam of light. It ripped through the darkness of space, vaporizing all in its path, including 3 minor-class fleets and the Zenturian flagship fleet containing Vesuvius Exodus. In an instant the hero of Zentar was removed from existence along with any hope of winning this battle. The Balians finished off 2 of the Varsan's standard-class fleets and began to flee the battle as there were no more orders to follow with the loss of Vesuvius Exodus and his fleet. The destruction of the Zenturian flagship fleet sowed confusion and unrest among the Zenturian forces, and while some stayed to fight, others fled. It was later announced in a communication from a surviving Zenturian minor fleet that the blast of light came from an enormous defensive system on Station Erica. The 2 fleets left behind during the retreat were taken captive by the Varsan flagship fleet. Their sacrifice did not go to waste, as they allowed the bulk of the survivors from the Zenturian forces to escape. The disastrous Battle of Neptune was an unexpected defeat for the Zenturian Empire and a heroic victory for the Varsan alliance. The news quickly spread across all civilizations, and the Varsan confidence in the conflict began to breach new heights. The Zenturian and Balian fleets that fled the battle were ordered to return to Zentar to regroup. With the loss of Vesuvius Exodus, the planet held a ceremony to mark the loss of the hero, to celebrate his life and accomplishments alongside those who lost their lives in the Battle of Neptune. The search for a new commander of the remaining scattered fleet was in progress and would take some time before launching another plan into action, especially against the unpredictable nature of the Varsan alliance. The Zenturian officers would have to take their time in the war room. Although the Zenturian and Balian forces were defeated at the Battle of Neptune, the offensive into the solar system was not over yet. A couple of hours following the battle, another clash would take place. This time the battle would be between the Royalist Union and the mother planet of humanity, Earth. With the majority of the Varsan fleet previously stationed in the orbit of Neptune or being neutralized, the Earth should be easy pickings for the Royalist Union, who were ordered to blitz the world. This battle is the last desperate attempt that Vajira's alliance would take in offense against the Varsan alliance. The loss of life was destabilizing the order back on Zentar, where families and workers began to go on strike. This was becoming a war of attrition, and the thing Vajiris needed most right now was a decisive victory over the Varsan to re-establish his people's morale and confidence. Not only in the conflict, but in his image. Chapter 16, Birthplace of Humanity. Book of Revelation 6:13 to 6:17. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. And said to the mountain rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Earth, a third planet from the sun, the birthplace of man, previously the only place known to host life from humanity's view, and where our story began. A planet that was home to millions of species of plants, animals, and sea creatures alike. This planet has been around for 4.5 billion years, and was once 70% covered by salty oceans. Today the planet possesses a colder environment from the nuclear fallout in previous centuries. The oceans are about a quarter the size of what they used to be, and the green terrain of the planet has been covered with mechanized farms and apartment complexes. The surface is riddled with urban sprawl and trembles in the shadow the beautiful planet used to be. This change did not come from nothing. The plague of humanity rose to dominate, control the planet, and slowly ate away at its beauty, leaving the masterpiece unrecognizable from the image God had originally created. Today, the Earth is under control by the Varsan Alliance, an interstellar civilization which claims itself to be a confederacy of worlds. Earth's population had been spread far across the galaxy and today houses 12 billion people, including 2 billion topians, all of whom work in factories, mechanized farms, and space shipyards on the planet to support the Varsan Alliance on the home front. In the year 2480 CE, 70 years in the past, an agreement was signed between the Royalist Union and Eastern Empire that they shall not split Earth. This agreement prohibited mining, as they believed it would result in the same planetary implosion that occurred on Mars in the past. The mantle and core of the planet prior to the agreement had been harvested to such an extent that if these measures were not taken, Earth would have collapsed from within that same year. Today, Earth is a place that many people live and reminisce as their home world. The great world holds memories and the history to humanity's success. As is the case with all things, Earth's time was limited and soon its fate would be decided. Fast forward to the present in 50Z, the Royalist Union fleet encroaches on Earth. The Royalist Union's leading Kohler's dynasty held a prolonged grudge against the Eastern Empire, their rival human nation who are now known as the Varsan Alliance. Although the Varsan Alliance pledges itself to be the saving grace of the galaxy, as the only nation able to halt Zenturian dominance, the Royalist Union sees them in a different light. This grudge was passed on from generation to generation for 234 years. The nuclear bombing of Moscow, which killed millions of the Royalist Union civilians and soldiers partaken by the Eastern Empire during the European Civil War, sparked the Union's vengefulness. The Eastern Empire aligned themselves with the Republicans in the past against the Royalists in their conflict, and their involvement greatly set back the Royalist Union compared to all other human empires at the time. The effects of this linger into today, where the Royalist Union remains an insignificant power in relation to the might of the Zenturian and Varsan civilizations. This battle would be their long-awaited chance to achieve the revenge they sought for over 200 years against the Varsan Alliance. The Royalist Union were desperate to prove themselves and would partake in any actions to accomplish this reprisal. They now find themselves in the spotlight where they hold the perfect opportunity to demonstrate to the galaxy they should not be taken for a minor nuisance. In the galaxy, as it was on Earth between human nations of the past, the legitimacy of a civilization was dependent on its capability to demonstrate its might, no matter the means in doing so. A civilization that does not retain the capacity to be feared when it is expected, is a civilization doomed for collapse. The Royalist fleet departed from the orbit of the Moon and arrived right outside Earth's orbit, where they caught the Varsan's disorganized garrison fleet and space station off guard. The Varsan informants and communications only had information regarding the plans to strike Neptune in the solar system. After their victory there, they lowered their guard and returned to their status quo. The arrival of the Royalist fleet was a complete surprise, and the people living on the Moon that the fleet was hiding nearby believed the thousands of ships were a Varsan fleet returning from the Battle of Neptune. The Royalist invasion force inbound to Earth was the largest military operation they have ever assembled, containing all their space fleets into one united force. The expedition was led by King Myler Kohler. To himself, he was in a flagship fleet of 10,000 spaceships. Kohler was supported by 2 standard-class fleets, 2,000 ships per fleet, and 4 minor-class fleets, 1,000 ships per fleet, bringing his total numbers at the start of the battle to 18,000 ships. Kohler's forces were against 11,000 ships spread throughout various Varsan fleets scattered in the area. Alongside these unprepared Varsan fleets, there was also Station Veronica, which housed around 2 billion people, around 1 billion people less than Space Station Erica in the Neptune system. Although a slightly smaller station, Veronica also equipped a gigantic laser cannon, the exact model Erica has, which was used previously in the Battle of Neptune. Hearing of the destruction Station Erica brought in the Battle of Neptune, Kohler aimed to neutralize that threat before history repeated itself in his battle. Not only did Kohler want to neutralize the massive turret, but he also aimed to utilize its power to its full extent. The battle began with the Royalist Union speeding forward, seizing their advantage over the unprepared Varsan positions. A minor fleet was immediately dealt with right as it spotted the oncoming advancing hostiles. The Royalist fleet split up. The flagship fleet moved directly to engage with Station Veronica and its nearby fleets, accompanied by 1 standard-class fleet. The remainder of the Royalist forces advanced to engage the other Varsan fleets that were scattered around Earth's orbit. Station Veronica had its laser fully charged and ready to fire, but with the attacking fleets coming from the direction of Earth and its supporting fleet in front of the Moon, it couldn't fire as it would threaten the planets being struck beyond the fleets. This action essentially disabled the station's deadliest weapon and only allowed it to utilize its short-range station-bound orbital turrets. The isolated standard-class Varsan fleets were quickly overrun and picked apart by the swift Royalist fleets. In contrast, the Royalist forces only lost a single minor-class fleet in the engagements. The surviving standard Royalist fleet was on its way to reinforce the evenly matched skirmishes now taking place between the minor-class fleets from both sides in close orbit to Earth. While this was ongoing, the Royalist flagship fleet quickly dealt with the Varsan fleets near Station Veronica and intensified their firepower against the station alongside their accompanying standard fleet. During the battle with Veronica, they begun to deploy landing craft to the station in all areas surrounding the central Giga laser cannon. Intense firefights erupted on the station between its military garrison and the Royalist strike forces. Hundreds of people died every minute in these engagements, occurring all around the station throughout its vast warehouses, narrow corridors, armories, and control rooms. Biochemical grenades used by the Royalist strike force teams gave them an advantage in the tight quarters and allowed them to advance much more effectively against the garrison positions. The battle on the station would rage on for the next 2 days, with advancements as little as one office space made every couple of hours in certain areas as they continued their race to occupy the control center for the station's deadly superweapon. Following the reinforcement of the Royalist Standard-class fleet in the evenly balanced engagements between the minor fleets, the Varsan forces were all destroyed while taking down one Royalist Union fleet. With the remaining 3 Royalist fleets being freed up from battle, they began to bombard the surface of the Earth to induce chaos on the planet while the battle for Station Veronica was still underway. Both engagements would continue for the next 2 days before the battle would escalate even further. As the battle raged on, the Varsan put together a makeshift relief force sent from Neptune to disrupt the ongoing bombardment of Earth and to take down the fleets engaged with Station Veronica. The Varsan relief force contained 5 standard and 4 minor class fleets in hopes to break up the Royalist offensive. With the arrival of the Varsan fleets, the remaining Royalist fleets moved forward to engage the oncoming enemies, breaking their bombardments. The thousands of men in the strike forces on Station Veronica were left behind to continue their operation without orbital assistance, meaning that their deadline to succeed was shortened to a couple of hours. The fleets began to battle one another in close proximity to the Earth so that Station Veronica was still unable to use its laser, as it would rip a hole through Earth in its line of fire. As the fleets smashed into one another, the darkness of space was illuminated by the intensity of their laser fire. The entirety of open space in the tightly packed battle was colored with laser light. The organized Varsan formation efficiently broke through the tattered Royalist fleet positions and surrounded most of the fleets, which were soon engulfed entirely in their line of fire with no escape. The situation for the Royalist Union was growing increasingly desperate following every passing hour. The Royalist fleets were suffering heavy attrition in the battle, where they quickly lost their 2 remaining minor class fleets and 1 standard class fleet. Their last remaining standard class fleet was completely encircled by the enemy forces, with their flagship fleet pushed back outside the encirclement. Comparatively, the Varsan only lost 2 minor class fleets in the engagement. It looked as though the battle was a guaranteed victory for the Varsan relief force, which effortlessly broke through the remaining Royalist fleets. That was until a communication sent from Veronica Station reached Kohler's flagship. The communication entailed a Royalist strike force member in what looked like a control room. The soldier stood there and yelled,
"We finally found it! We found the control room for the Giga Laser! We won, my liege, we won! Escape with your life and the remainder of your forces while you still can. The laser will fire shortly. The revenge your ancestors were working towards all these years is finally a reality. Leave us behind. We number in the thousands and are ready to sacrifice ourselves. Please do tell everyone at home the strike force were the heroes of this battle. Long live the king!"
After the message cut off, the remaining 5,000 ships in the flagship fleet warped away en route for the Zenturian system, leaving behind their standard fleet and those on the station. The future image of the Royalist Union and balance of power in the galaxy was now in the hands of those who were still fighting. The Varsan were at first confused by the withdrawal and believed that the Royalist Union were merely escaping with their lives rather than understanding the status of Station Veronica. The strike force waited for the perfect opportunity as all the Varsan fleets surrounded the last remaining Royalist fleet in the battle, which was being annihilated and had no hope for survival. The last communication sent out was to the captain commanding the remaining fleets sent from the control room. The strike force soldier said a quick prayer and thanked him for his service to His Majesty and people before entering the laser ignition code obtained from a Varsan soldier's notebook. After 10 minutes of heating up, the laser launched from its battery on Veronica, slicing through the darkness of space, ravaging all in its path, including the remaining Royalist fleet and most of the Varsan fleet, burning a hole through the center of the Earth.
Those lives lost in Moscow may now rest in peace. Revenge has been served. You were never forgotten.
Following the blast, the remaining 2 fleets paused in shock for a couple of minutes to observe the destruction that had just occurred. They then rushed over to Station Veronica and didn't give those in the strike force a chance to surrender. All were executed on sight until there was no one remaining. Earth has been destroyed, along with all life on it. This war is more than vile at this point. This is an apocalyptic threat on a galactic scale. Where the minds predicted the Earth was supposed to end thousands of years ago, the Varsan's view of the galaxy shares a similar view. Earth is gone. All that remains is Space Station Veronica and the moon overlooking the ruined world. Chapter 17, A New Galactic Order. Following the destruction of Earth during the Solar System offensive, both sides reserved themselves from making any more advances against one another. The loss of life has mounted to unsustainable levels. If the conflict were to continue, both the Zenturian and Varsan civilizations would never be able to recover. The next 2 years passed by with absolutely no combat between both sides, and peace talks were eventually held between the leadership of the Varsan Alliance and Zenturian Empire. The peace summit was held in the capital city of the Zenturian Empire located on Zentar in the city of Velith. The leadership of the two civilizations worked on an agreement together that would return peace and stability to the galaxy. After 2 long weeks of formulating and debating terms, the treaty was finalized. The articles of the treaty are as follows. The New Galactic Order. 1. First and foremost, in the present year of 52Z, all hostilities and armed conflict between all civilizations must cease for the period of 10 years, as the destruction of fleets and populations reached a scale of apocalyptic status. Apocalyptic status. A conflict is given this status once a war involves the use of weapons of mass destruction against populations of a planet to the scale that a planet is destroyed, fractured, or annihilated. B. If any nation were to violate the peace period of 10 years, all nations signed on this treaty would take it as an act of aggression and would neutralize the threat to peace. 2. A temporary trade embargo would be placed on the Royalist Union, as its destruction of the planet Earth permanently removed the native home world of humanity from the face of the galaxy. 3. Blarvis and Yavis are given the right to remain under the rule of the Varsan Alliance in the Zenturian system, but must meet the following conditions. A. Blarvis must export 80% of its minerals mined to the Zenturian Empire every year for a period of the next 10 years. B. Yavis must give up 250 million of their population annually to the galactic slave trade for a period of 10 years. C. Both planets must be demilitarized, with the exception of a surface garrison. No military fleets may be stationed or in orbit of the planets for a period of 10 years. This includes other civilizations' presence. Civilian and trade ships are another exception to this rule. 4. The remaining 8 billion Topian population held by the Judarian Republic and Varsan Alliance shall be shipped to a far-out uninhabited system. Topian slaves and POWs may not be part of this resettlement program. The Varsan Alliance and Judarian Republic will be responsible for providing supplies to the new Topian colony in its first 2 years, as well as transportation to the system. 5. Every civilization must appoint 1 delegate for every planet it has a permanent population to participate in the newly formed Galactic Council. The Galactic Council will be a place to mediate conflicts and disputes between nations so that access to peaceful resolutions is more of a possibility. A. Each delegate will have 1 vote. B. For resolutions to be passed, a simple majority over 50% must be met. C. The civilizations hold the starting number of delegates based on planets occupied. Large planets like Zentar will equal 2 delegates/votes. I. Zenturian Empire, 2 delegates. 2. Varsan Alliance, 3 delegates. 3. Royalist Union, 1 delegate. 4. Balian Hegemony, 1 delegate. V. Judarian Republic, 1 delegate. I. Topians, 1 delegate. B. The Topians receive 1 vote by default as they are in the process of being resettled on a new world in a new system. The brutal conflict sparked by the assassination of King Mylar Kolar II's heir and only son, Prince Mylar Kolar III, was finally put to rest. In the 4 short years the war took place, with the bulk of the fighting being in the first 2 years, billions across various worlds had lost their lives. The following chart shows the status of the galaxy's statistics revolving around population and fleet power prior and then immediately after the war. The conflict would forever leave a deep-rooted effect on the galaxy, earning it the title of the Horrid War, also known as the First Galactic War. The signing of the New Galactic Order Treaty marked a new era of peace. Memorials were finally held celebrating the lives of those lost in the conflict, both civilian and military, in different fashions across all the civilizations. The diplomatic state of the galaxy was altered after the conflict. The Judarian Republic, of whom was previously a part of the Zenturian Alliance during the Horrid War, decided to cut their military alliance with the Empire to pursue their own interests without the threat of being dragged into another armed conflict between the major powers. They had nothing to gain in the last conflict and lost a decent part of their fleet power. The Republic, as per the treaty, worked on transporting the Topian population they took in after the Battle of Noi Erde to a new world. The Judarians looked to better their relations with their previous enemy, the Varsan Alliance, in order to have non-hostile relations with both major powers moving forward. To improve their relations, they offered to assist the Varsan and take over the role of resettling all the dispersed Topian populations they had with no catch. They aimed to better relations with as many civilizations as possible in order to secure their neutrality in the galaxy. In the year 53Z, the Judarian explorations discovered a new system nearer to the center black hole of the Milky Way. This system was named the Lilac System and was the 3rd system ever reached by the known civilizations. The Lilac System contained 4 planets revolving around a dwarf star. Although the system was small, it had its own civilization in an early industrial era on a planet named Isid. The planet had purple oceans made up of an acidic liquid that the native civilization of Troth consumed as both a water source and food. The rest of the world was covered by a thick brush of tropical jungle similar to the area of Neu Erde that was inhabited by the Topians in the past. Small pockets of fresh water were discovered by the Judarian expedition in these jungles. The Judarians made a deal with the natives to provide them with more advanced spacefaring technologies and weaponry, so long as they gave up a portion of their planet's jungles for the surviving Topians to live and start a new life. The Troths accepted the offer, and the planet now belonged to two separate species and civilizations, just as Neu Erde had been in the past. The Lilacs' three other planets were already named by the natives on Isid. One planet named Action has acidic oceans just as Isid, but with no landmasses or continents. The planet was extremely uninhabitable. The world named Wistong was a world with a stone-covered and mountainous surface rich in minerals. The planet was given to the Varsan Alliance along with Action, but the Varsan would only move population to Wistong, as Action was too uninhabitable. Instead, the Varsan moved Station Veronica from the orbit of what was left of Earth to the orbit of Action, where studies of the acidity of the purple liquid were done. The last planet was Phorion, a desert world a little larger than the lost planet of Mars. The planet had small oases scattered on the far east of the world, which is where the Judarians set up their first colony. Not too long thereafter, the Varsan wanted a piece of the world as well and set up a colony in the arid and dry west in search of mineral and oil resource deposits. By 55Z, the Lilac system was flourishing under the split control of the newly founded Topian civilization, the Troth civilization, and the Varsan and Judarian colonies. The expansionism of the Varsan and Judarian Republic prompted the Royalist Union to take on their own expansion initiatives. In late 55Z, the Union discovered another system which they named the Jangaru system. The system did not contain any advanced or intelligent life forms capable of developing civilization. But animal life was discovered on the massive swampy world of Jangaru the Union colonized. The system had an average-sized star around the size of the Sun in the solar system and had 4 planets. Jangaru with 2 moons, Ure the ocean world covered in thick algae, Star another swampy world with 2 moons, and Iron Hand the planet farthest from the star covered with dry arid deserts. The whole system was placed under the control of the Union, and by the year 5060 every planet had a settlement on it. The final discovery in the post-war era was by the Varsan Alliance warping 45 degrees the wrong direction from returning to the solar system from the Lilac system in 57Z. Their vessels arrived in another dwarf star-centered system with 3 planets. The newly discovered system was named the Ongo system and contained the planets of Norlo, Mithlo, and Hina, which were all overly habitable planets to the human and fox population of the Varsan Alliance, as they are continental worlds. All 3 planets were colonized by Varsan settlers later that year, most migrating from the planet of Yavis in the Zenturian system to avoid being forced into slavery. The new expansion era has officially begun, and the Varsan Alliance took the lead. In this short time frame, the Varsan colonized 5 new planets, the Royalists colonized 4, the Judarians colonized 1, and the Topians were resettled on 1 as their new homeworld, following the discovery of the Troth civilization. Chapter 18: Zentur Dynasty Legacy. For thousands of years, Zentar had been under the rule of the Zentur family dynasty. The family had acquired great wealth, power, and influence in the planet's early history, allowing them to rise through the ranks of society and dominate all others on the planet. The Zenturian Empire was established in 3000 BC in Earth years. By the time the Egyptians have finally united into a civilization, being one of the first on Earth, the Zenturian Empire had already united their planet under one banner led by the Zentur family. The planet and its species derived their name from the family, demonstrating their profound effect and reach of influence throughout Zenturian history. As of 57Z, the Zenturian Empire and Zentar remain under the rule of the family, with Vigirus sitting on the throne following the death of his father, Galagus, in 40Z. The assassination plot carried out by Vigirus helped him bypass the wait to take on the leadership role of the Zenturian Empire. In the plot, he murdered his father, mother, and brother, who he framed for the homicide. The tragedy was ruled a double homicide-suicide. Vigirus was the only one who knew the truth of what occurred that day and kept it in his personal journal. In his family he had a son, daughter, and a brother die from the nuclear strike carried out by the Varsan Alliance in 48Z during the Horrid War. Vigirus' sister Avagi was married to King Jackson Halite, leader of the Balian hegemony. Avagi was the first centurion in the royal family of the Balians, which intertwines the civilizations and is another reason why the Balian-Centurion relationship is in great standing. Jackson and Avagi had 1 daughter and 1 son. Their son Jackson II recently had a child of his own in 56Z, naming him Jackson III. With this news, there were 2 future heirs for the Balian throne. Comparatively, the Royalist Union's monarch, King Mylar Kohler, II had lost his one and only heir to the throne with Mylar III's assassination that had led to the Horrid War. With this tragic loss comes those looking to prey on the newly presented opportunity. Vigirus didn't need to do anything to make Jackson Halite marry his sister, which had led to even greater influence in the Zenturian system. In the case of a new opening in the succession for the Royalist Union's throne, he aimed to involve his family. Vigirus had one female descendant, his granddaughter, Exa. Exa was the daughter of Vigirus II, the only pure-blooded Zenturian line of descendants of Vigirus which were birthed by Zavadit, his first wife, who was a pure-blood Zenturian. After the incorporation of the Humanic Empire's human population, Vigirus began to breed with human wives in order to produce a more superior bloodline of Proxima Centauri. In 50 AZ, Vigirus offered up his granddaughter Exa's hand in marriage to King Myler Kolar II. At the time, King Kolar reached the age of 60 years old compared to the 16-year-old Exa. The diplomatic marriage was accepted by the royalist king, and when news of this exchange reached Vigirus II, Exa's father, he was infuriated. He saw through his father's plan to expand his influence and individual power and had no issue with that fact. But giving up on his blood, his race, the Zenturian people, his own family, he felt entirely betrayed. At the same time this exchange occurred, Emperor Vigirus announced his heir to the throne to be his son, Alexander. Alexander was a Proxima Centauri and was married to a pure-blooded human and whose son resembled a human more than a Zenturian. Vigirus too began to see his father as an enemy to the Zenturian Empire and its future. As the oldest son, he kept quiet for now but was burning up inside. As time dragged on, things began to worsen. Findings in late 50 AZ revealed that after 2 generations a Proxima Centauri bred with a human would produce a pure-blooded human offspring. With the current rates of interbreeding between humans and Zenturians, Vigirus too saw that his species were bound for extinction if a drastic shift didn't take place in the future. Every night he kept himself up thinking of what could be done to stop this demoralizing future. He began to question everything that had occurred in his family's history. He saw his father as a great leader, but a leader who didn't believe in his own blood. Vigirus too believed in the philosophy of blood and soil. Where there exists a people, there is a nation. Without a people, a nation would lose its identity and fade into the archives of history. Around 4 years had passed since the diplomatic marriage between Exa and King Kolar II. Exa was pregnant with twins and had 3 children already, all of which were Proxima Centauri offspring. Vigirus II, not wanting to be far away from his daughter, moved to Neu Erde in its royalty district so that he could frequently visit her and keep his family closer together. Vigirus II found himself spending most of his time in pubs around the district and began attending stage shows. He drowned himself in hedonism to avoid embracing the dark future his people were destined for if things were to continue the way they were going. That was until a man got on stage and instead of drawing laughter in a comedic gig, he shocked the crowd as he began to speak.
Gentlemen, today we find ourselves in great times of uncertainty. Our leader has dragged us into a conflict based on his own petty self-interest in getting revenge on the Topians for the assassination of his son. As you may have seen in the news, these past 4 years our king partook in a diplomatic exchange, where he would take a member of the Zenta royal family as his wife to produce future offspring. This is a massive issue, my fellow countrymen. As lifeblood of our nation on the highest levels is tainted and converted to the likes of another species, everything will begin its collapse from the top down. There is only one way to fight against this change, and that is to retain our purity. Today, the Union stands as nothing more than a puppet to the Zenturian Empire, and our royal bloodline no longer represents our people. When the government no longer represents its people, it is illegitimate. Now our responsibility to replace it has arrived. Stop drowning yourselves in sorrow and despair. The way has now opened. Join us to reach the solution to become saviors of our peoples.
Vigirus too remained in his seat dazed from what he had just heard. He came to see a comedic show to escape his despair, but instead he received a reality check. He strived to learn more about this so-called the way and what it entailed. He followed the man backstage shortly after he spoke and began a conversation with him saying,
"Hello, sir. I know you may not wish to speak to me as I am a pure-blooded Zenturian and have brought your nation great pain with the royal marriage involving my daughter. But please do hear me out when I say that everything you just spoke about was true, and I would like to learn more of the way which you had spoken about to provide a resolution to these trying times we find ourselves in."
I have no issues with a pureblood, don't be so hard on yourself. I believe that the separation of our species is natural and that tainting each other's by crossbreeding will only bring great destruction in all our futures. My name is Cornelius Cades. I am a pure-blooded human who only associates with those of my own species, but I have respect for those purebloods of other species. You had mentioned that you are the father of our new king's wife, Exa. Why would you give up your daughter to such a bargain? Do you have no shame?
I found myself in a precarious situation between siding with my father and his rule or the protection of my own daughter and bloodline. I chose the former out of fear of how my father would respond, as he is a notorious man of action. I am his only pure-blooded offspring and hope to keep our royal family's bloodline untainted from the mixing of humankind in our society, and I am desperately seeking a solution. I am willing to sacrifice whatever is asked of me. I have nothing left to lose except my own.
Very good. I appreciate your capability in acknowledging that you were mistaken and want to make a change in the way your life was moving. The way is the rebirth of the natural order of the universe. The way is the only solution to the apocalypse. The way will fix everything. Welcome, brother, to the cult of Tellus, where we will liberate your mind, body, and soul from the modern degenerative state of the galaxy towards a brighter future. Assist us in our endeavors with your royalty status on Noyoda, and we will assist you in your own segmented movement we'll have you establish on Zentar. This is a revolution for all species and life. Join us or be left behind.
I have no other choice than joining arms with you at this point. From now on, we will collaborate towards accomplishing what we set out to do. I will use my contacts, as best as I can, on Zentar, being the son of the Emperor. My contacts will funnel in funds and military supplies to the cult of Tellus. The future will be ours, I guarantee it.
A couple months later, Vagiris II began to formulate a plan with the cult of Tellus with Cornelius Cadiz on Neu Erde. The cult of Tellus is a religion that rose to prominence following the destruction of Earth in the Horrid War. The religion revolved around the worship of the mother planet Earth and all the creatures it gave birth to. Although most are extinct today, there remain various farm animals and humans that were spread across various star systems and planets. The cult wants to ensure a future where humans are safe and independent from all other species, emphasizing purity, superiority, and faith as their sacred values. They hope to bring about a revolution in the Royalist Union by toppling the monarchy and replacing it with a religious theocracy led by the cult of Tellus Prophet, of whom he is currently anonymous. Vagiris II is participating in treasonous acts by supplying the growing faction on Neu Erde, and using his position of royal authority to sway various military officers to supply their firearms to what he called trade deals with other nations, and releasing information about King Myler Kohler, II's whereabouts and his plans to the cult. He believed in the tenets of the cult and began his own break-off of the religion in establishing the cult of Zaltri. Zaltrism is a past and long-forgotten religion on the planet of Zentar that emphasized its people's superiority among all other species. Today the Zenturian Empire is atheist and all religion had been outlawed by an emperor centuries ago, and Vagiris II strives to bring it back. Disgraced with his father, Vagiris II changed his legal name to Zaltri. He plays along with the persona that he is the one and only savior the Zenturian people want and so badly need. He has begun converting people in the entertainment districts of Zentar and those who had lost loved ones in the wars of the Empire's past. He was looking for lost souls to bring to salvation. Chapter 19, Return of the Prophet. Humankind is stuck in an endless cycle of conflicts that inevitably lead to peace that create weakness, thus resulting in more conflict. Each step of the cycle feeds into the next and has been this way for thousands of years since the beginning of human civilization. After departing from Earth, the species still manages to find itself stuck in this cycle. The year 63Z marked the return of religion amongst the stars. The atheistic godlessness plaguing the galaxy was soon to be the target of the overwhelming influence and impact religion can have in people's lives. With intelligence leaked from Zaltri, previously known as Vagiris II, the cult of Tellus managed to send an armed band of soldiers into the royal chambers of King Kohler II. When they reached the front doors of his bedroom, they opened fire through the sealed doorway, hoping to kill whoever was behind the door. The lasers ripped through the polished wood and the doors were kicked down, with the soldiers charging into the room expecting to find the king dead on the floor. Instead, they discovered X's limp body with laser holes burned through her temple, right lung, and stomach. The Zenturian daughter of Zaltri was murdered along with the two twins she carried in her pregnancy. There was no sign of the king anywhere to be found in the room. Palace guards rushed to the bedroom of the king and found Exa dead on the floor and caught soldiers searching through the dressers and closets. The guards shouted warnings and were met with gunfire from the terrorists. A firefight erupted in the hallways of the royal palace. News of the incident broke into the mainstream news cycle and broadcasted across all the Union's planets. King Kohler received the news from his vacation palace on Jangaru, stunned with the event. The king jumped out of his bed, leaving his Balian and human mistresses, and hustled to his communication room. He gave a message to the Royalist Union that was forwarded to all other civilizations. He detailed the assassination of his wife, Exa, back on Neu Erde, and announced the nation is now under a strict martial order until the terrorist threat is dealt with. Once the news reached Zentar, Zaltri lost control and began to break down in tears as his daughter had just been killed, but he could not reveal to those around him that he was a part of this plan to overthrow the monarchy of the Royalist Union. He left his family dinner table in a depressed state to partake in his part of the plan, which was to strike various spaceports on Zentar's surface with his supporters. Thousands of launch platforms were targeted, and the detonation of explosives set up by Veltri supporters interrupted Emperor Vajira's plan to reinforce the martial law order in the Royalist Union. The firefight in the palace continued until the Royalist forces decided to airstrike the palace after declaring it a lost cause, killing all the king's staff along with the terrorist insurgents in the complex. The news of striking hostages had the population of the capital city riot and march in the streets, where they clashed with police and soldiers who were enforcing the lockdown. The terrorists' cultists took advantage of this chaotic opportunity and began to detonate explosions in the police buildings around town along with the electrical grid. Martial law was now impossible to keep in place. The rioting intensified and shots began to ring from both sides. The police patrolling the streets often found themselves fighting block to block in the city, and as video footage spread across the intergalactic web, people throughout the Royalist Union began to take up arms against the police and military of whom they believe instigated this conflict. Neu Erda's cities were burning, and laser fire continued through day and night with no breaks for anyone in the area. With the ongoing chaos, the death toll began to climb higher and higher. As the death toll rose, so did the people's frustration and the king's incompetency in handling the situation. The king ordered airstrikes on the whole of Neu Berlin on Neu Erda, and what was once a prosperous city became rubble and empty concrete shells littering the landscape. The cult of Tellus has achieved its goal in spreading chaos across the planet and to push blame on the monarchy. With the growing distrust in the monarchy and the people polarizing, the prophet broadcasted to the whole of Neu Erda via its planetary communication system, which was hacked by cultist hackers with information previously leaked by Veltri to the organization. The broadcast opened with a man wearing a large dark hood shrouding his face in darkness, hiding his identity. He identified as the prophet and talked in lengths about the monarchy and its incompetence to protect the well-being of its people, going in depth on the responsibility that lies with King Kolar in the Horrid War, the degradation of the royal family through species crossbreeding, and the decline of humanity's power in the galaxy. He ties this decline to the destruction and loss of Earth, where the Royalist dynasty abandoned the planet and later obliterated it. Destroying the mother world of humanity is the greatest sin committed by a living thing, according to the prophet. The monarchy was beyond redemption, and he called for citizens to arm themselves and to give their faith to Tellus, the god of humanity. His final message included orders to entrust all that he says in finding salvation in the way and to slaughter the remainder of the monarchy's royal bloodline. Following the prophet's broadcast, his supporters filled the streets armed with weapons and military vehicles, supplied by Veltri's arms smuggling the previous year. They repeated his message on loudspeakers in the empty streets. People began to come out of the rubble of their homes destroyed by the king's airstrikes and joined in on the march. The marches quickly overran the whole of the planet and spread across the Union to its newest colonies. The worlds fell one by one and began to obey the message presented by the prophet and entrusted themselves to his religious mission to save humanity and the Royalist Union. Jangaru had marches of its own, which were ordered to be firebombed by the Royalist Union Monarch Regiment and led to some officers turning against the king. The king hired bodyguards to constantly escort him everywhere he went until one day in his palace one man ran up to him with a knife and stabbed him in the arm. The king let out a scream to his guards, and instead of assisting him, the guards began to stab King Kolar too as well. The staff in the vacation palace quickly jumped in on the action and began to carve away at the monarch's flesh until he was nothing but a pile of diced meat on the palace floor. With this act of betrayal and murder, the fall of the Royalist Union's monarchy, which had lasted over 200 years under the rule of the Kolar dynasty, finally came to an end. With the power gap and successful removal of the monarchy, the prophet proclaimed himself the savior of the Royalist Union, which he renamed the Neu Crusader Order. He didn't plan to stop spreading the word of Tellus in their civilization, but wanted to spread its message far across all civilizations in the galaxy. This uprising was just the beginning of his grand crusade he had in store. As the fighting reached its conclusion following the fall of the monarchy and the rise of new leadership, the religious battle for Zentar was just entering its infant stages. Millions died in the swift religious revolution and coup, but the conflict could have been far more catastrophic. The same will not be in the case in the Zenturian Empire, where impurity reigns alongside an overwhelmingly stupendous population, if a revolution were to occur. Chapter 20, The Merchant Empire. While the Royalist Union faced an overthrow of its monarchy, the Zenturian Republic was establishing trade networks throughout the galaxy. The Zenturians were never a war-hungry people, but they still dreamt of attaining more power and influence. When the newest party in power was elected on the basis of maintaining peace and stability in the civilization, they aimed to achieve more power through economic and financial means. The ruling party aimed to expand the influence of the Zenturian Republic without coming in direct conflict with any other nations. They found the best route to be in finance and trade, as they had neutral or friendly relations with all other civilizations. After seeing the numerous conflicts in the past, the Republic wanted to find a way to profit off the battles without ever putting their troops in the field. The Judarian banks began to loan out trillions of coins in each civilization's currency to control their neighbors' finance. By dominating their finance and having other civilizations rely on them for loans, the Republic placed itself in even greater standing in the galaxy. After the establishment of the central banking system and loan offices on Fluna, the Judarian population experienced a tremendous increase in wealth. Every citizen was now well-fed, had luxurious services, and lived a life of low stress outside their work as a merchant. Fluna was established as the central galactic commerce hub where all civilizations had their banks, stock exchanges, and trade deals take place. The Judarian began to purchase newly constructed space stations built by the Varsan Alliance and place them along warp routes as rest stops and trade ports for those traveling system to system. The space stations also had fuel centers for ships to refuel if they were on a long journey across the galaxy, which encouraged interstellar trade even further. With this move, all trade routes were regulated and controlled by the Judarian Republic. All the galaxy's civilizations seemed to prosper off this expansion of mercantilism by the Judarian Republic except the poorest and weakest nation of Troth. Troth was desperate to gain more power, but had limited space to expand to along with limited population and resources to do so. Seeing the other civilizations benefiting from the rise of interstellar commerce and trade greatly frustrated the Troth civilization and pushed the nation in a corner. Soon after, Troth began to disguise their ships with black paint and skull logos to raid trade routes that passed through the Lilac system. This action by Troth marked the beginning of space piracy. The Troth civilization began to rapidly progress in wealth and power as trade ships were captured and ransomed along the route. Checkpoints were set up on the warp routes between the Solar System and Lilac system, as well as the Ongo-Lilac corridor. These raiding checkpoints collected a percentage of the cargo that ships were carrying that were passing through. If the trade ships refused the fee, they were attacked and boarded by the pirate fleets. The Galactic Council took note of the space piracy occurring around the Lilac system but couldn't come up with who was responsible for the barbaric acts. The space pirates were labeled as their own faction by the Council and were known to be a hostile force. If a military fleet from any of the civilizations were to encounter the ships marked with skulls, they were expected to engage. Small skirmishes occurred between pirate fleets and various civilizations moving supplies and people in and out of the Lilac and Ongo systems. Even Troth fleets engaged the pirates to curb suspicion of their involvement in the piracy away from them. The Judarian Republic found another opportunity of wealth with the rise of space piracy. The nation began to offer up mercenary ships to pay per job and the security of civilian vessels. The mercenary services were bought by all civilizations who didn't want to commit their own forces to the security of their transports, giving even more power and control of trade routes to the Judarians. The great increase in wealth drew the attention of the galaxy's top powers of the Zenturian Empire and Varsan Alliance. Both did everything they could to better their relations with the merchant civilization. Increased interstellar trade between the civilizations resulted in a complex system of bartering and odd revaluations of each other's currency. In order to make the system less complicated, the Judarians streamlined their currency, the Judarian dollar, $JD, which became the galaxy's international dollar in the purchase, sale, and exchange of goods and services between the civilizations. The $JD was loaned out by the central banking system established earlier in the year on the planet Fluna and was printed in mass to distribute across the galaxy. With control of the galaxy's money supply, trade, and transport security, the Judarian Republic became one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the galaxy. Although friendly with the Judarian Republic throughout most of its history, the Zenturian Empire became more vocal in the Galactic Council, speaking of regulations needing to be put in place to keep the Judarian Republic from becoming too powerful. Emperor Vajirus was the first to fully see and understand what the Judarians were working towards with domination over galactic trade and finance. He believed that this was a great threat to his empire's future to expand across the whole of the Milky Way galaxy and uniting it under his empire. The Judarians' control poses a rising threat to this plan and its future. How this would be handled was still to be decided. Chapter 21, Enemy of My Enemy. Vajirus II, now known as Veltri or the Prophet of Zaltrism, may have disagreed with his father's methods of leadership in encouraging crossbreeding between humans, giving the title of heir to his Proxima Centauri brother, and his overall outlook for the Zenturian Empire's future. But he had to stay reserved as he still worked on the Zenturian Board of Advisors. This board assisted in all political and governmental dealings between Emperor Vajirus and his people. Veltri knew that he was still in a prominent position, being the first and eldest son of the emperor, and serving on the board of advisors gave him an edge in making political decisions that would accelerate the empire into a state of vulnerability evermore. He believed this would help grow his cult following as people began to look for different solutions regarding the future of the empire. In times of great desperation, populations will always search for a savior. Veltri was in a powerful position, but at the age of 73 in the year 63Z, he felt as though he should be accomplishing more. Desperate for his own solution to the Zenturian Empire's future, he began looking for more alternatives and allies to help him grow his faction's power. Although he holds ideological differences to the Judarian Republic's mercantile monopoly of the galaxy and their weak support in the Horrid War, He knows that working with the Merchant Empire would help fund his initiatives and private military on Zentar. Veltri and the merchants shared one common enemy, Emperor Vagirus and the current Zenturian regime, of whom oppose both religion and mercantilism as threats to their power. In the year 64 Z, the cult of Zaltrism and merchants from the Judarian Republic made a secret agreement to assist each other in the removal of the current regime under Emperor Vagirus. Whole cities were converted to the cult of Zaltrism on Zentar through propaganda-funded initiatives on all forms of media funded by Judarian merchants. The conversion of 20 cities in 1 week caught the eye of the emperor, who began to crack down on the religious outburst, labeling it a mind virus in his broadcasts. He placed the cities with the highest concentration of Zaltrism under martial law and began a hunt with his secret service targeting its leaders and missionaries spreading the word of Veltri. The problem would be quickly solved at its source if Emperor Vagirus knew that his son went by the name of Veltri in private, but that was not the case, as Veltri's identity was hidden from the public eye, just as the prophet is on Neu Erde in the Neu Crusader Order. Veltri aimed to have a more peaceful approach to overthrowing the regime compared to the cult of Tellus approach and avoided as much unnecessary bloodshed with his followers and the Zenturian military as possible. Every member in the cult of Zaltrism swore to an oath willing to give up their lives when the time came, with no resistance, as a reaction would cause an outbreak of riots across the world, thus leading to bloodshed on both sides. For now, the cult was persecuted and limited in its power by the secret police and Zenturian military while trying to maintain its growth across various cities and regions on Zentar. Veltri observed the advisors who investigated the leadership of his cult and who oversaw limiting its spread, and decided to attack them from the inside. He often questioned their loyalty at meetings when their plans went wrong and tried to tie any mishappening to suspicion, which led to the frequent execution and replacement of various advisors who were previously loyal without a fault to the emperor. Vagirus became paranoid of those around him, and in close relation, he began to write in his journal his plans for his heir, Alexander, who needed to know who to trust and what plans to carry out in the future. Vagirus II, aka Veltri, was one of the people not marked of suspicious activity and distrust, and was the only original member of the advisory board who was not replaced in its frequent purging. The merchants on Fluna questioned the ability of Veltri to take down Emperor Vagirus. They began to support the Varsan alliance more. In the case that Veltri fails, the Varsan would involve themselves with the leadership on Zentar through direct conflict. The Judarians began to pay off various Varsan officials and council members to spread rumors in their nation and its leadership. The rumors spread and began to sow distrust among the nation towards the Zenturian Empire. The Zenturians were honoring their side of the peace treaty and had no plans to come into conflict with the Varsan alliance anytime soon, but the rumors which were spread around the nation stated the exact opposite.
The Zenturian Empire plans to invade us under the leadership of the nation's heir, Alexander. Emperor Vagirus is plotting to destroy our trade ships with help from the pirates outside of the Lilac system. The Zenturian fleet is mobilizing for an invasion. Did you hear? Zentar's leadership plans to break our peace deal and leave our council. Was this treaty made just in the interest of their empire's future plans?
With the sowing of these rumors in the Varsan alliance, the Judarian merchants gained access to more than one alternative in taking down Emperor Vagirus. This chaos would continue for the next 6 years. Rumors would sweep across the whole of the Varsan alliance and remove feelings of neutrality towards the Zenturian Empire. Meanwhile, the cult of Zaltrism continued to spread among various cities on Zentar, causing Emperor Vagirus great stress and paranoia. The beginning of 70Z marked a new age. Emperor Vagirus suffered a stroke and passed away at the age of 108 years old. The coronation of Alexander as emperor began, and for the first time in the empire's history, a non-pure-blooded Zenturian would ascend to the throne. The youngest emperor in the empire's history would be 40 years old that same year, compared to Veltri, who is 80 years old. Great changes in the galaxy were on the horizon. Chapter 22, Take Up the Torch. The passing of Emperor Vagirus and the ascension of Alexander to the throne brought about a new age. Alexander believed in the equal treatment of all Zenturian citizens no matter their species, and believed in uniting all their peoples under a system with equal opportunities. Alex appointed his son, Jonathan, at the age of 13, to his board of advisors to work with the youth of the country alongside Alex's older brother, Vagirus II. Vagirus II Veltri was in the ear of Emperor Alexander from day one and emphasized how the restrictions against religion should be lifted to strive towards a more equal and freer Zenturian populace. The emperor decided to call an end to the hostilities between religion and Zenturian governance, but made it clear that he would allow the practice of religion among its people, and not allow religion to play a role in the empire's government. John was easily influenced and swayed by Veltri, as their age and experience difference was 67 years. In the control and upbringing of the youth, Veltri held much more influence and decision power in comparison to the 13-year-old John. With the restrictions lifted from religion, the cult of Zaltrism spread across Zentar as though a dam broke open, flooding the whole of the planet. The cult only allowed pure-blooded Zenturians in its ranks and urged any pure-blooded humans supportive of their cause to migrate to Neu Erde and to join the cult of Tellus. Millions of humans who sympathized with the tenets of the cult migrated to the Neu Crusader Order throughout the year. A primary focus of Emperor Alexander's leadership was to maintain the empire's alliances with the Balian hegemony and the Neue Crusader order as to not isolate himself from the galaxy. He also wanted to build better relations with the merchants of the Zenturian Republic to stabilize the Zenturian Empire's growing economy. Alexander proceeded with an outlook of the galaxy in the lens of pacifism and to retain the peace that has existed the past couple of decades with the goal of inducing prosperity in all parts of the galaxy. When discussions between the Varsan alliance and the Emperor took place, the Varsan refused to hear him out and had great distrust towards the new leader. Whenever Alexander encouraged the Varsan to demilitarize, their officials took it as a ploy to weaken their military rather than strive toward keeping the galactic peace intact, and so instead they began to militarize to even greater extents. The new emperor didn't just find troubled relations with the Varsan alliance, but also ran into hostile conversations with a new leader, the Prophet, in the Neue Crusader order. In conversation with the Prophet, a debate broke out into an argument about the future of Zentar and its population who continued to crossbreed. When the Prophet requested prohibition to species crossbreeding, Emperor Alexander denied any potential restrictions on the activities, and the Prophet ended the call with a statement.
"We cannot align ourselves with such distasteful and weak leadership. As of today, the new Crusader order severs our alliance with the Zenturian Empire until a competent leader returns to the throne."
Alexander may have lost an ally in the Neue Crusader order and was unable to improve relations with their rival, the Varsan alliance, but he did not give up his attempts at making the galaxy a more safe, inclusive, and equal environment for all. He communicated with Utopian and Trough civilizations on Issa that he would support the two weak nations with great gifts containing various spacecraft, new technologies, and $JD payments as reparations for the atrocities committed by his father's alliance in the Horde War, as well as bringing the nations into more prominence in the galaxy. The two civilizations took the gifts and began to have a better view of the Zenturian Empire, who was trying to include them in a new vision for the future of the galaxy. At heart, Alexander is a friendly man with ambitions to spread his peaceful and youthful ideas revolving around peace, equality, and inclusivity to all other living things. Countercurrent to the rigid caste system, which held Zenturian society together the past thousands of years. He wanted to bring about a real positive change to the galaxy and the division it was bringing upon itself. Some accepted his message and attempts with open arms, and others discarded it. The Balian hegemony, who had been a long ally of the Zenturian Empire, found itself supporting the leadership no matter the change in direction or vision throughout its long history. Emperor Alexander's regime changed nothing in their view of the empire. If anything, the Balians were closer in relation to the empire more than ever before, as they now have Zentur blood running through their royal family and leadership. Where there exists the Zenturian people, there will always be the support of the Balian hegemony. The galaxy is moving in a new direction, and great change is still to come on the horizon. New empires, new leadership, new arising powers all contribute to this future. Will it be a future of peace, prosperity, and equality for all living things, or will it be another era of strife, division, war, and hatred? That will all be revealed in due time. The game was now in full swing. The fate of the galaxy lay in the hands of those who can play the game most effectively. In the end, it isn't how many pieces you lose, but victory is what ultimately separates the winner from the loser.